Alaska is the perfect place to go if you want to get away from the rest of the world. As America's least densely populated state, you have plenty of breathing room from any kind of authority or prying eyes that may want to know what you're up to. For this reason, my home state is very attractive to all sorts of weird and unsavory groups. I've stumbled across Scientology centers at the end of a dirtbag road with nothing else for miles around. Heard stories from doomsday preppers who claim to have bunkers made out of shipping containers in the sides of mountains, and met people who have come out of religious cults in the interior that wanted to keep their followers away from any contact with the outside world. All of this and more you can find in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the only big city in the state. Growing up, we had about 250,000 people in the city. It takes about 30 minutes tops to drive across, so that gives you an idea for what up north considered a big city. The only other real city in the state is Fairbanks. These two cities are connected by 360 miles of a 2-lane highway. It is a 7-hour drive one way to get between them through one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. Mountains rise up on either side of you between Anchorage and Denali National Park before you drive through these colossal canyons carved out of the rock over tens of thousands of years by melting glaciers and rivers. Past Denali is another 3 hours of driving through a vast flat interior plain with mountains in the distance. I say all of this to help you understand just how desolate it feels in Alaska, even on the highway. After you get out of Anchorage or Fairbanks, there is nothing but wilderness as far as the eye can see, save for the occasional small town with a max population of about 1,000 people on a good day. 10 years back it was even less. Alaskan girls are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a great appreciation for the great outdoors that women in the lower 48 don't really have if they're near a city. The joke is that Anchorage is the biggest rural city in the country. All this brings context to the following story. In high school things were different, or at least they felt different. I was a young and stupid woman who thought I could conquer anything due to the aforementioned built tough attitude I was raised with. Senior year of high school, I decided to treat myself to a camping trip in the mountains up past Takitna. Nothing fancy, just an overnight or two in the most beautiful state at the most beautiful time of the year, mid-June. Going up north in peak summer here has a weird feeling to it. The sun never really sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, that's what it feels like. It gets to about dusk and that's about it. It's still bright and sunny out the whole night through. Shout out to listeners in the far north of Scandinavia and Greenland. The false sense of security, I had been thinking that the midnight sunlight would mean safety, which probably nearly got me killed or worse. My second mistake was not telling anybody where I was going. I just packed up for my trip, stopped at a Subway for lunch, and headed out into the great beyond. The drive was fine. A solid 2.5 hours of driving north along the highway took up most of the afternoon as I jammed out to the greatest hits from the radio on Cool 97.3. After you get through the Matsu Valley, you get into the mountains again. Tall spruce and evergreen trees line the road on both sides with the occasional empty space where there has been some clear-cut logging. All of this gives you a sense that while you're out in the wilderness, you are still connected to civilization in some way. This led me to my biggest mistake, not staying at a state park campground. I was in high school with only a part-time job and didn't want to pay the $15 overnight camp fee and was too scared to risk the fine, so I found a spot that looked good and pulled off the road. The map I got from my dad said there was an old mining site up a nearby mountain, so I decided that would be the best spot to head to for an overnight. My logic must have been that it was badass to spend a night in a mining ghost town or something. Pulled off the road, packed up my backpack, put on some bug spray, grabbed my map and compass, and started off in the woods. Now this hadn't been the first time I had done this. I had been on wilderness backpacking trips on my own with my dad throughout my childhood. I knew my orientation skills and had taken some wilderness survival courses at camp. I wasn't just some dumb blonde wandering off into the woods with no idea of where I was. A solid 45-minute hike up into the hills and I finally made it to where the old mining camp was supposed to be. There was nothing there, just an old concrete foundation with some holes in it and nothing else. I was very disappointed but unsurprised at the outcome. I set up camp off in the woods and set to building a fire for dinner on the concrete slab. Here you are supposed to set up cooking a ways off from your camp just in case bears are nosy. The last thing you want is a 1,300-pound grizzly poking his nose at your tent, wondering why you smell like Campbell's suit and s'mores. By this time it was getting late, probably 10 p.m., but the sun was still high in the sky, and by the time dinner was over it was nearly 11. I was starving and dug in. About an hour later, it was about as dark as it was going to get, so I hunkered down in my tent for the night, confident that the overgrowth was private enough for whatever animals might come out around then. I woke to voices in the distance and slow movement crashing through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into a few on some campouts, so it wasn't uncommon. I relaxed and figured they would just pass through without incident and closed my eyes again. That's when they found my fire pit. A man's voice cried out into the brightest forest. "Who the heck is camping on our property?" I froze. I knew I had messed up and was getting up, grabbing my purse and putting on my shoes so I could go. Apologizes before I heard the man again. "When we find you, you're dead. You're on private militia property and trespassers get shot here." That's when the whole situation changed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just pack up my tent and sit with some armed guy lurking around. I carefully put my shoes on, put my keys in my purse, and slunk away into the underbrush as quietly as I could. My thought was to slip away, wait until I got bored and left, then go back up, pack and leave. I spent 20 minutes hunkered behind a log in the woods, barely in earshot before I heard a second voice calling for the other. They had found my tent and were tearing it apart, going through my stuff. I heard one of them shout out, "Bed's still warm, man. Trespasser's a chick. She even left her underwear." The first man yelled out, "Okay, van out and find her. She thinks she can trespass, then there's going to be hell to pay." At that point, I wasn't concerned that I had left my spare change of underwear in my bag, or that these creeps had found it. I needed to get out of there. Quietly, I made my way down the mountain for a good 30 minutes, tiptoeing and taking care not to step on twigs or make a ruckus. After the rustling and shouting of the men had faded quite a bit, I said screw it and booked it as fast as I could in the midnight sun down the hills. I tripped and fell and got scraped up more times than I care to remember. Finally, I made it back to the road, but much to my horror, there was no car. I knew I had come out either up or down the road from where I had been. I couldn't quite remember where I was at the time, but picked a direction and started walking. I rounded a corner on the road and saw my car, and the two men standing beside it. They were armed and dressed in surplus military gear. I hid in the brush on the side of the road and watched. A while later, several more men appeared from the trail I had taken. They dumped all of my stuff next to my car, hopped back in their ATVs, and drove off. I went up to my car, careful not to be seen, and found a note on my dashboard. It read something like, "If we ever catch you on our property again, we won't hesitate to use force. Consider this your last warning." I went back to start loading stuff into my car and noticed what they had done. They'd cut up or destroyed all of my gear, probably as punishment for trespassing. Honestly, I'm thankful they did that because I'm grateful I didn't get shot. Ever since then, I have taken great care to camp only in designated camping areas. To the weird Alaskan militia group, I know you weren't actually going to kill me, but nevertheless, I never want to see you again. This kind of scares the heck out of me. I moved to Denton about a year and a half ago. I was always told it's a pretty safe place, and I felt the same when I lived in my first house. When I moved to my new place about 8 months ago, I didn't think it would be much different. Actually, I thought it would be safer since at my last place, my roommates never locked the doors. In the new place, I have a roommate and a big dog, so that makes me feel safer. We live in a good area where there are families around and stuff, but since I've moved here, there have been 4 different instances where men have come to my house and done something strange. All have occurred to me. All have occurred at night from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. Not one has done the same thing. The first one happened about a month into living here. It was 3 a.m. and the doorbell rang. Who the heck would be at my door right now? As I'm walking to my door, I can see and hear the person trying to get in. I'm terrified. I look through the peephole and see the silhouette of a guy that looks like my roommate's ex. They had just broken up. I wake her up and tell her. She opens the door a few minutes later and the guy isn't there anymore. She peeks her head out the door and sees the same guy inside my car. She yelled out to him and he sprinted away. 2. The second time it's 9 p.m. and I'm home alone. Somebody rings the door. My lazy butt didn't get up to go get it, and a couple minutes later the door rings again. This time I finally get up and no one's at the door. I open it and see 2 men in an SUV pulling into my driveway. They're almost all the way up to the house. Once they see me, they stop the car, put it in reverse, and leave. I don't know what they wanted or what they were going to do, but it was weird. 3. So one night my roommate is home alone, around 9:30 p.m. and the door rings. She doesn't get it, thinking it must be her Amazon package. They will just leave it at the door or whatever. The door rings again. Confused, she gets up and looks through the peephole and there's a guy with a black ball cap on, looking down so she can't see his face. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I have your Amazon package." "Okay, do I need to sign anything?" He says no. Okay, so you can leave it on the ground. He ends up just standing there for a minute or so. She nervously stares back at him through the peephole, waiting for him to walk away. He eventually does. For about an hour after that, our big-ass dog keeps growling at the door. She has never done anything like that. Another weird thing is that Amazon stops delivering at 9 p.m. Maybe he was just running late. 4. The last one is definitely the creepiest. This happened last month at around 1:30 a.m. I wasn't home, but my roommate was with her new boyfriend Alex. They're lying in bed, and from the corner of Alex's eye, he sees a pair of eyes in the crack of the blinds from her window. He gets up and runs outside. She sees a grown-ass man in a construction vest looking through her window. The guy jumps when he sees Alex and grabs her trash cans right next to her window. He pretends to just be a trash dude, kindly taking our empty trash cans out for us. Didn't know they had night shifts now, on Fridays. Trash only comes on Monday and Wednesday mornings here. So yeah, these are my stories. I've heard there's a man in the area that the police are looking for. He's forcing himself into women's apartments in Denton. It's sad that I have to live in fear because I'm a target being a woman. It may sound dramatic to many, but after all these experiences I've had, on top of this, the guy that's been named a serial offender is on the loose. I'm terrified to live alone next semester. I've never been scared of that. I'm pretty tall, and I'm a heavier woman, and I've grown up with all brothers. I thought I knew how to fight, but now I'm like, could I even help myself? I'm generally a calm, collected person, but this gives me anxiety every time I'm home alone and I hear something. When I was 11, my family lived in Alaska about 14 miles north of Anchorage. As soon as you leave the actual city of Anchorage, you're in wilderness pretty quick. This event happened to me in the summer of 1977. I remember because the original Star Wars had just come out a few weeks before, and I was obsessed with it at the time. In 1997, the quote-unquote town I lived in was actually just a series of roads and off-roads. Most of the people there commuted to Anchorage for work. That's what my parents did. They both worked nights, meaning I spent most of my time alone at home. I don't have any siblings. Our house was about a half-mile in from the nearest paved road and surrounded by woods. I didn't have any real friends that lived close by. I knew a kid who lived at the end of my road. His was actually the closest house to me and was still about 300 yards from mine. One afternoon that summer, I was watching TV when there was a knock at our side door. I looked outside and saw it was the kid from the end of the street with somebody else. I opened the door and he told me this kid was his cousin, whose family had flown up from wherever they were from to visit. I can't remember this kid's name. I do remember immediately being nervous around this guy. He had blonde hair down to his shoulders and wore a t-shirt under a thin leather vest. He also had one of those wallets on a chain. This kid's eyes were dark as heck. I was 11 and hadn't ever seen evil before, but this kid set off something in my brain. The boy from down the street even seemed nervous around him. He said he had told his cousin about my BB gun and how cool it was. I had recently been given a BB gun as a gift. I told him to wait outside and I would get it. I just knew I didn't want that kid in my house. So I got it and went outside and handed it to the weird kid. He rolled it over in his hands and looked it up and down without his expression ever changing. Without handing it back, he asked me, "So how much do you want for it?" I can't remember my reaction after all of these years, but I didn't really need money and the gun was a gift, so I told him it wasn't really for sale, and I remember apologizing for some reason. Unfazed, the kid hands the gun back to me, then reaches behind his back and pulls out the biggest knife I'd ever seen. I remember thinking for a second that it was a sword. You ever seen the movie Crocodile Dundee, where he tells some robbers, "That's not a knife, this is a knife," and pulls out a huge knife? Well, that's the knife this kid had. The kid said, "How about a trade then?" I shot the BB gun at Cans. What was I going to do with this thing? Hunt a grizzly bear? I declined the offer nervously, and the kid turned away and started walking in the direction of their house. I went back inside and watched some more TV. About an hour later, there's another knock at the door. I go to our side window where I can see the door. I peek out and sure enough, it's that kid again. This time he was alone. The second time he knocked was louder and he called my name. I stayed quiet. He left the door and started walking around her house. My mom had a sunroom where she grew plants. It had large windows all along the wall. I saw him go to those windows, press his face against the glass, and cup his eyes, trying to see deep into the house. I stayed out of sight. Luckily, there were no lights on, and I had turned the TV off when I heard the knock. When he couldn't see anything, he continued around the house. He took out that huge knife and began tapping the butt of the handle along the outer wall as he circled. Then he started saying, "I know you're in there." I almost shit myself. Of course he knew I was in the house. I was 11 and home alone. How could I have left the house? Hop in a car and take off? Heck, both our cars were gone anyway. I continued keeping low and quiet, hoping he might think I went to a friend's house somewhere else. How long could this psycho just circle the house? He was maybe 14. You have to get bored quickly. No such luck. This kept up for about an hour, the tapping in his voice telling me to come out and that he had another trade for my gun. Screw that. I had gone all in on the I'm not home tactic, so I stayed quiet and made my way to the kitchen, where our one telephone was. Like I said, this was 1977, with no cell phones, and our phone was attached to a wall in the kitchen. Luckily, it had a super long handset cord. I got it, stayed low to the floor, and called my mom at work. She took me very seriously, but there was no way she could get home. My dad was in the Air Force, and they sure wouldn't let him skip out early to handle his son's crisis. I would have to ride it out. The sun had gone down, and by that I mean it was barely peeking above the horizon. In the summer, the sun never really went completely down in our area. The kid kept pacing around for another 30 minutes or so, and then was completely gone. Not being an idiot in a horror movie, I just stayed down and quiet. Eventually, my parents got home. I was still awake. They brushed it off as to say, "See, nothing to worry about." I never hung out with the kid down the street again, and I pretty much stayed inside the remainder of the summer. There was something wrong with that kid. Maybe it was in my head, or maybe he would have done something absolutely brutal to me, just for that damn BB gun. I was living in Hawaii and had to move to LA for work. I didn't know anyone, was fairly broke, and my job wasn't going to help with moving expenses, so I resorted to scouring Craigslist for a room for rent. After literally thousands of scams or weirdos, I finally found this amazing girl. She was funny and we had similar interests, and we even worked in the same field. She didn't have a place yet, but she and another girl were looking at several houses that required a third roommate. They were totally okay with doing all the work, seeing as how I was an ocean away. She called or Skyped with me about once a week and sent pictures of each house they looked at. All in all, she was incredible. Fast forward 3 months, they found a huge and gorgeous house. Everything was settled. The two girls, Evan and Juliana, were moved in, and Evan, the original girl from Craigslist, picked me and all my stuff up at the airport. On the ride home, she starts telling me horror stories about her past roommates. Every single one had screwed her over in some horrendous way, and she was terrified of being close to people after that. She said that she wanted us to be the people who turned that around for her, that she wanted us to be a little family. She then drove us not to the house but to a nearby Starbucks, where she chain smoked and told me about her stepdad who was in AA, and how she'd briefly been attending NA meetings after a short bout with painkiller addiction, but she had decided that she wasn't a drug addict and didn't need it. Then she admits that she's only known the other roommate for a month and a half. Red flags all over the place. Why would an LA native need to find strangers to live with her on Craigslist? Why the oversharing about drugs and family, and why had she never had a positive roommate experience? But I pushed it all aside, giving this girl the benefit of the doubt. A few weeks go by in the house and all's well. I forget she ever seemed off, and we start becoming close. Then she takes me on a tour of LA for a day and proceeds to tell me her entire disturbing life story. When I say we had gotten close, by no means were we close enough to make this appropriate. She tells me about her stepfather molesting her, getting sent to a mental hospital when she told somebody about him because he's a doctor and said she was criminally insane, getting raped by a lesbian at the hospital, and beaten by guards, almost dying, her mom's severe narcotic addiction, her ex-fiancé having a psychotic break and trying to kill her, her struggles with a chronic kidney illness that required many surgeries, and her recent long-term boyfriend disappearing under mysterious circumstances. The horrific stories just went on and on. It sounded like something from a movie, and a part of me questioned if all could possibly be true. But again, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Things go on for a while, and my doubts about her subside. Then my food starts disappearing. I ask both girls about it privately, and Evan claims that the other girl, Juliana, had confessed to her that she was a compulsive overeater. Naturally, Juliana claims to be innocent. I side with Evan, and we start mildly bullying Juliana to try to admit that she had been stealing food. The dishes start piling up in the sink and nobody is washing them except me. I ask both girls, and again Evan swears on her life that it's Jules. Finally, Juliana had enough. It turns out she's been eating out for every meal. We all had extremely different schedules, and Evan lied to my face about the dishes and the food. When confronted, Evan starts crying and saying, "How could you accuse me of such things? I'm a good person." And we end up apologizing to her in the end. Finally, the tension builds between the two girls due to many repeats of this situation, and one night when I'm at work, they start fighting. Evan calls me saying Juliana hit her and she's afraid for her life. Call Juliana and tell her to find a new place to live, and she goes to stay with friends and within a week moves out. Now things get really weird. Evan moves out of the master bedroom and starts sleeping in the living room every night. After I repeatedly request that she return to living in her bedroom, she tearfully confesses that she's been on high-dose opiates this whole time and is trying to wean herself off, but it makes her too weak to walk downstairs to her room. Feeling sorry for her, I ended up babysitting her for weeks while she withdraws. It was both terrifying and disgusting, but I really wanted to help her out. During this time, I even seen her naked and realized that she has no scars from her repeated surgeries. Beyond that, she confides in me that she hasn't been working at all this entire time, but has been going out to score drugs and get high every day, and now she's flat broke. She apologizes for lying, saying over and over that she's a sick addict and just needs help. I get her into AA and NA as soon as she's able to walk, driving her daily to meetings and holding her hand the whole time. A longtime boyfriend and her oldest friend move in with us a short while later, to help with bills and all. That's when it all goes from bad to unbearable. Evan goes to visit her mom one night and disappears for a week, returning very clearly high and claiming to be sober. She then starts going on many trips to visit friends in other states and is rarely home. When she is home, she babbles endlessly about how great sobriety is and how she's finally healing, while clearly nodding out on opiates. I end up finding something suspicious on her computer, and she admits to me that she's been working as a call girl and bringing customers to the house. I tell her she has to stop, and she claims she already has. Around this time, she becomes very physically ill. Finally, I get a phone call from her after another absence. She's hysterical. She's, get this, 6 months pregnant. She didn't know because she was high. The baby was severely malformed and there was no way of carrying it to term. I comforted her, thinking that this trauma outweighed all the weird behavior she exhibited. She had the procedure and afterwards disappeared for almost a month. I thought at one point she was dead until she texted me asking if her cat was okay. When she returned, she proceeded to start eating all of our food, using all of our toiletries, sleeping on the couch, and smoking inside, which was not okay with us at all. She was also very clearly on drugs. At first we tried to be nice about it, but she lied and lied and lied, even going so far as to say her room was haunted and the ghost made her sleep upstairs. Finally, my boyfriend snaps and yells at her. She calls the cops and claims he assaulted her. They didn't believe her, but the other roommate did. Then one night when I'm at work, she uses pity and sweet talking to convince my boyfriend that we should all be friends again. I told him it was a lie and he didn't believe me. When I get home from work that same night, my room is trashed, and I asked if he did it, and of course he hadn't. She'd been in there looking for cash or drugs, which I don't do. When I asked her about it, she looked me straight in the eyes and said it was the ghost. After that, she started sending me insane emails claiming that I had been her best friend and had betrayed her, accusing her of heinous crimes and even convincing her she was a drug addict as a form of sick psychological torture. The emails get increasingly intense, becoming 10 to 20 page books about how she didn't feel safe in her own home and how I was the embodiment of pure evil, and that my only purpose in life was to torment her. In these emails, she claimed that she used drugs on rare occasions and that I had made up everything about her problem, that I had been verbally abusive about her abortion, and that we had repeatedly physically assaulted her. We were genuinely afraid for our safety, especially after the police showed up one day and took her in for a mysterious psychiatric hold. We never found out why she was carried out of the house barefoot and handcuffed, but 4 LAPD officers took her in. After that, we just tried to avoid her, but she got the other roommate involved. She even went so far as to claim she had pneumonia from the stress of living with us and our constant abuse. The emails continued to escalate. At one point, she said that I had been a sister to her until the evil spirit in me had forced me to abuse her. This is when I realized that her definition of abuse was a bit skewed, and all of her stories about her childhood, exes, old roommates, and even Juliana had been complete fabrication. Of course, she didn't have scars from the surgeries. Everything she said was a lie to garner sympathy so she could take advantage of people. Now I realized, of course, that she was completely mad. We found a new house, and the night before moving out, I hacked into her email. Come to find out, she had been telling our landlord that we were heinous criminals, and telling her parents that she had been fired from a job because of me and needed money. All kinds of lies. Also, we came to find out that the guy who got her pregnant didn't mysteriously disappear. He ran away because they slept together once, and she started stalking him. Obviously, everything she ever said was a creepy lie. After moving out, the harassing emails and texts continued to the point that I had to have her blocked on both, and seriously considered getting a restraining order. This was about 2 years ago. Last month, we found out that this little girl who claimed to have never been a drug addict and that I made all of it up had died of an OD. She was evil. This wasn't a situation where nobody tried to help a sick person. Everybody around her tried to help her, and she manipulated and used them. I don't feel sad that she's gone. In fact, I still want to punch her in the face. In early 2007, I was freshly 18 and newly married, living in Fort Polk, Louisiana, while my husband was training at Fort Benning. I was born and raised in Alaska, so living in the continental US was a vastly new experience for me. My husband had a weekend off, though he was not allowed to leave the base, so he bought a Greyhound bus ticket for me to visit him and meet the soldiers he became friends with. I had never been on a Greyhound bus before, but I was excited to drive through the South and see new places and have my own little adventure. Sure, plenty of creeps bothered me on the bus and at the stations, but I still had interesting conversations, met new people, and generally enjoyed the experience. Regardless of the time, each station we stopped at was open and offered food, outlets for charging, and bathrooms. So when we arrived in Columbus, Georgia at around 2 a.m., I expected the station to be open. It wasn't. Everyone else who ended their journey had a ride waiting for them, and suddenly I was completely alone outside a locked building in the middle of downtown Columbus in the full dark and terrified. I didn't know what to do, and my phone was nearly dead from the long last leg of travel. I thought about walking to a gas station, but I had no idea which direction to go, and I couldn't see any nearby lit buildings. I truly expected the gas station to be open, thinking I would stay there for a bit while my phone charged and I had something to eat and could have access to a phone book so I could call a cab. All I had was an old sign hanging on the side of the building with incomplete phone numbers for taxi companies. The numbers had faded, been scraped off and defaced. There was only one complete phone number, and it was handwritten in Sharpie at the top of the list. Better than nothing, right? Wrong, because I called the number and a guy answered, casual and sleepy, asking who I was. I apologized, explaining I was trying to call a cab, when the guy perked up immediately and said, "Oh yeah, that's me, I'm on the way." My phone died 10 minutes after I made the call, and it was another 15 minutes before the guy showed up in a traditional-looking yellow taxi. I noticed the cab wasn't marked, no logo, number, rates, or anything, but it had that taxi light thing on the top, and in my young naive mind seemed totally legit. He waved me over. I got and asked him to take me to Fort Benning, finally feeling some relief. The doors auto-locked, and I will never forget the first thing he said to me. He was silent until we got to a main road and said, "Did you really think it was a good idea to call a number written in Sharpie?" I froze. In retrospect, no, it wasn't the best idea I've ever had. I had so few options and didn't want to be stranded in a huge foreign city in the middle of the night. I don't know what else I could have done. After a minute, I tried to laugh it off and hoped he didn't notice I was shaking. I reached for my phone before remembering that it was dead and realized that if something happened to me, nobody would know I had even made it to Georgia. Staring at me in the rearview mirror, the driver told me what was going to happen. There's no use in getting to Benning this early. The Post Hotel isn't even open. Drive around with me for a while, hang out, and I won't even charge you. I told him no thanks. I really needed to get to Fort Benning right away. Nah, he said, and that was that. We drove to a worn-down apartment complex where he told me he was picking up a regular to keep me company. I didn't reply. What could I even say? I wasn't raised religious, but I was praying to God for some kind of miracle. Out came a woman who looked a bit like a cliché prostitute. Tube top, mini skirt, smudged mascara, and an unlit cigarette hanging from her lips. Short but ratty bleached hair, pock-marked face, and a cheap purse. I have no idea who or what she truly was, but she got in the front passenger seat and lit her cigarette. She turned to look at me. "Don't worry, he's cool. We're cool." That definitely helped. I had never considered jumping from a moving vehicle before, but even if I wanted to, the back doors were child safety locked and I couldn't open them. Trust me, I tried. I was trapped like a caged animal just waiting to die. I felt so stupid and foolish. Sitting in the back seat of the cab, no idea what to do and no idea what was going to happen. I kept trying to rationalize it, downplaying the situation in my mind. I was too afraid and frozen to actually do anything anyway. As we were driving around, the girl was telling me about the driver and how he was ex-military and just started his cab business. What a down-to-earth fun guy he was and how lucky I was to be picked up by him. How I was cute and young and everything was cool. Her words were a bit slurred and I knew she was either drunk or high on something, but I didn't really care to know. We pulled up outside a small blue house sometime later, and about an hour after the break of dawn, the driver told the girl to keep an eye on me while he went inside. I'm in full-blown panic mode, the suspense of it all making it so much worse, so the girl offered me a cigarette to calm my nerves. I wasn't a smoker, but I said yes. She got out of the cab and opened my door, stumbling a bit before sitting on the curb and lighting another cigarette. She lit mine as I sat next to her, and I started thinking about whether or not I could outrun her with my heavy backpack and how long the driver would be inside for. Without me asking, the girl told me the driver was inside showering in preparation. I asked what he would be showering and preparing for, but she just kept repeating how he was cool and how much fun we were going to have, and how cute I was. Then she said, "Ranger cab," because he was like a ranger or something, or maybe that was his dad. He's a good-looking military muscle guy. I feel like God finally answered my prayer when the girl slumped over and passed out in the grass. I saw the track marks on her veins and guessed it was heroin, and apparently the driver was inside taking a shower and wasn't going to be back in the next few moments. I grabbed my backpack and ran like a bat out of hell. I don't remember exactly what happened after I started running. I know I took off as fast as my feet would carry me and that I didn't dare to stop to catch my breath. One minute I was sprinting for my life, lungs on fire, and then I was trudging along with tears in my eyes as I walked through the Fort Benning gate with my military spouse ID, asking how to get to the base hotel. Honestly, I wish I knew how I got there. I was in deep survival mode and didn't stop to process any of it until I made it to my room. I don't know if somebody gave me a ride, if I followed a map or what. I've never blocked a memory out like that before or ever again. I told my husband everything when I finally saw him. He didn't believe me. I probably wouldn't have believed me either. His lack of trust made me think nobody would take me seriously, so I never went to the police. I still had the number I dialed saved in my call history. I knew the girl called it the Ranger cab. What I didn't have was the confidence or support to report it. Sometimes I think back to that day and wonder what would have happened if the girl hadn't let me out of the cab, if she hadn't passed out on the ground, if the driver had never stopped for a shower. It's one mystery I don't need the answer to, though. I used to work as a fetish model. It is something I did after college that helped pay my bills to supplement my full-time job. It is a unique fetish. It has a rather dedicated fan base, and I had quite a bit of admirers, many of whom I stayed friends with after I stopped doing it. Most of them are cool people who don't even really bring up my former employment because they respect me and know I'm a private person. I rarely had problems, but there was one dude who would just send me harassing messages all the time. They were very aggressive and demeaning, and I didn't want that kind of attention. He would then try to be kind for a while and then be a creep. Bang, blocked him and forgot him. He would blow up my phone with calls and texts, and I also blocked him there. He would message me from other numbers, so I just changed my number. On social media, he would make fake profiles and try to harass me that way. I never add anyone I don't personally know anymore. I just ignored him, found him annoying and unbalanced, but not a real threat to me. Many years passed. It had been silent for a very long time, like years. I got a message from a girl wanting to be my friend. I didn't buy it at all because this particular admirer had a very distinct way of writing. Like I said before, very demeaning and demanding, certain phrases, etc. I just ignored the message. I have just started putting myself out there in online dating. I had gone on some lame dates the last couple of weeks. I got a match from somebody and he sounded pretty nice and friendly. After a few messages back and forth, we agreed to have dinner and traded numbers. I have to say the beginning of the date was actually really nice. My date was very considerate. We had easy conversation. After eating and drinking, we left the restaurant to walk back to his place. Even this was pleasant. We got back to his apartment and things are getting hot and heavy. I was really digging this guy until he whispered in my ear, "Why did you make me wait for so long?" When he said that, my stomach did a little flip. I asked him what he meant, and he told me that he moved all the way from the East Coast for me. My stomach started to drop, and I started shaking. It was then that something in his brain flipped like a switch. Instead of the gentleman I was with all evening, he started spewing all the things my online harasser would message me. Even details from conversations from like 7 years ago, which I had mostly long forgotten about, and he seemed so mad that I didn't remember all of these things. I was standing there shocked and topless, realizing what was happening, and I noticed that he kept looking behind me. I noticed an open laptop, and I am certain that he was recording what was happening. I told him I didn't feel well and needed to leave as calmly as I could, without letting him on that I was terrified. He must have known I was scared though, because he grabbed me and wanted me to swear this wouldn't be the last time I saw him. I smiled and nodded and offered to go out to a dinner. Another night. I don't know if playing it cool was going to work, but very honestly, I was prepared to start fighting if I had to. He relented and let me go to the bathroom to put my shirt back on and was able to walk back to my car by myself. I just drove in shock and silence all the way home. He had given me a fake name to go out on this date. He changed his demeanor. took advantage of the fact that I didn't know what he looked like. I googled his real name when I got home and saw his Facebook page, and that confirmed that he was in fact the man that had been harassing me for years. I hadn't even bothered to look at his Facebook page before because I just always ignored him and didn't feel like he was a real threat. I feel really stupid. So I immediately blocked the number he had been using for his fake name. I guess I will change my number too, since I am sure he will just keep calling. I deleted my dating profile, of course. I won't be going out again for a little while. I am of course going to the police to at least put this guy on their radar. Luckily for me, I didn't mention where I work specifically, and I didn't mention where I live specifically either, so I feel pretty good about that. Now that I know what he looks like, I can at least be aware. I feel horrified and stupid that I let myself be vulnerable. I will say I am certainly paying attention now. I'm a historical reenactor. That's kind of an important part of this story. I'm also a nurse, an ex-soldier, and a bunch of other perfectly normal things, but I do have this one slightly off-center hobby where I dress in clothes about 600 years out of fashion and sometimes try to hit people with a very large piece of steel while dressed as a hood ornament. Now, somebody really needs to write a psychological thesis on the subject, but for some reason, people dressed in historical clothes somehow become exempt from the usual social norms regarding sexuality and appropriateness. If you are dressed and armored as a Viking and wandering the streets of central Sydney, women will let you pick them up and carry them away with their friends without a word of protest. Try it in everyday clothes and you'll be tasered within seconds. And it works the same for women in armor too. Otherwise, normal men respond to armored women in bizarre ways that are utterly outside the normal range of everyday human interaction. I don't know the full explanation for it, but it just seems to be the way people are wired. So I was at a particular prominently enlarged medieval festival or fair for my American readers. The atmosphere is very immersive, and members of the public were encouraged to dress for the part, while the 400-odd genuine reenactors performed a range of the old activities around the grounds and spent the rest of the time wandering about, lending an element of medieval color to the proceedings. Armored, I'm pretty cool if I do say so myself, but my 15th century civilian clothing is to die for. A crimson/silk doublet over black thigh-high boots with spurs, and a pearl earring. And so I was wandering around the event one evening, being dashing and medieval and interacting with the general public as we are encouraged to do. And yeah, I'll admit it, being a little flirty and taking mild advantage of the aforementioned appropriateness disconnect that seems to take place when women are talking to a guy dressed a bit like Colin Firth in Shakespeare in Love. Here comes the disaster bit. After having fought and wandered around and given 2 lectures, by the evening I was getting a bit wary and sat down for dinner at one of the many stalls selling food. There was a group of young ladies nearby, and playing the part, I engaged with them in character, and we all sat around talking, laughing and mildly flirting for about an hour. Seconds after they left, one of them came racing back and whispered, "Our friend really likes you. Here's her email address," and thrust a folded piece of paper into my hand, then ran after her friends. Well, so far so good, right? Nothing boosts the ego quite like having somebody give you their number unsolicited, and I was quite pleased. But when I got home, the first time I checked my email, there was already an email waiting for me from this young lady. She had been onto the festival's webpage and found my details there. I still managed to feel flattery in response to all of this, and after all, her email was incredibly nice and a little bit apologetic at taking such a step unsolicited, and she was cute enough and had seemed bright and funny when we chatted, so I replied and we sent a few emails back and forth. Mildly flirty, but again, only a few, and when the first nude photos of her showed up in my inbox, several alarm bells went off in the back of my mind, which, being male, I ignored. How much of a stud are you that some woman you barely know is sending you naked photos of herself? Big self-congratulatory grins and self-backslaps all around. Voices of caution firmly ignored. And I get a bit more flirty, and in response, she went into utter overdrive. The photos, which had started out as flirty and artistic, became progressively more explicit, until they were soon the sort of thing that I think may even be illegal in Amsterdam. Still flattered, but finding the voice of caution getting louder by this time, I thought it was prudent to discuss with her what exactly she was doing. It was around this time that the terms like love at first sight, soulmate, and marriage were first uttered. Now, I don't lead people on with no intention of following through, and I'm certainly not a user of the find 'em, screw 'em, forget 'em school or any such thing, but this was a whole other magnitude beyond anything I had ever considered, and so attempting to be as diplomatic as possible, I politely declined any further conversation. At this point, it's still a funny anecdote. When she hacked my email account and character assassinated me on a number of online forums and associations I was a member of, it stopped being funny. When she out of the blue called my mom, my mother, who she told an amazing story about how I had led her on, even made love to her. Never even kissed her, by the way. Got engaged to her, pressured her to have an abortion, and then left when she miscarried after giving her nothing more than an STD. I wasn't upset. It was the explosive mother phone call that upset me, especially since I had no idea that any of this was coming. I was utterly blindsided. She also sent letters outlining a similar story to my employer, the organizers of the festival where we met, and even to trashy current affairs TV shows. Fortunately, most of the people she contacted gave me the benefit of the doubt, not least because they knew that we lived approximately 800 kilometers apart, and that my easily traceable movements pretty well confirmed that we had only met the one time. This happened in New Orleans, Louisiana a while back. My boyfriend and I and two other couples were partying in the French Quarter, and after several hours and many drinks, we called an end to that part of the night. This was before Ubers and Lyfts. We walked a few blocks from our hotel earlier that evening while it was still daylight, and now, in the early AM hours past midnight, began to make our way back. I was on crutches, not a good combination with alcohol, and began to slow, lagging behind. My two girlfriends, Bree and Z, were a few steps ahead talking, ironically about a strange dude dressed in tights and a cape who'd seemed to stalk us through a few bars, even plastering himself Spider-Man-like against the window of one for several minutes. Our three boyfriends were leading the way while laughing at anything and everything and sharing a smoke between them. Ahead, I watched the guys pass a food vendor and turn down a shortcut alley-looking street rather than continue to the end of the block and turn. The vendor, an older man, says something to Bree and Z, but they don't hear him, still giggling over the night's events. They are on the verge of turning into the alley behind our guys when the vendor looks to me. Just in case he feels dissed by them, I react especially kindly, making eye contact and sending a friendly nod his way. "Little miss, I got you right here." He pushes a steaming white paper wrap over the cart towards me. I start to refuse, but he quickly lowers his voice, saying, "No charge." Something about his tone alerts me, not to mention the food aroma is tempting, and I pause. He then speaks in an even more hushed tone. "Don't look, but they're tailing y'all, since before you crossed. Speaking of when we crossed over from the opposite sidewalk a while back. They're going to roll you." He warns of impending danger to me and the rest of my group now disappearing from sight. I'm freaked out, but remain casual since his furtive manner implies his safety is at risk if he's heard warning us. I holler to Bree and Z and our respective boyfriends to come back and taste this food. When my friends double back, the vendor wraps and serves them each a hot food and ball while quietly repeating what he told me. He stresses staying on the main walk, where it's well lit and busy, and staying out of dark alleys. On the pretext of hanging back while eating, we sneak a glimpse of who we've been so strongly warned about and noticed at least three sketchy guys loitering a few doors back watching us. They look away when we look their way. The Cape man mentioned earlier is not one of them. The scary vibe around them is intense, and I've always been one to feel these types of auras. Buddha and Vendor Man, I've thought about you several times through the years, so thank you for making sure we never met. What would have been our fate that night? I was teaching English in China. It feels like ages ago. I found a really unique job offer combining my love for the outdoors with conversational English. A job which is much more suited for me, rather than teaching in the Grey City. I couldn't have been more excited. My boyfriend and I applied and we were hired. They would pick us up in a van and drive us into the mountains where we would stay in a cabin. What could go wrong? When we got in the van, the driver was pissed drunk. I was young and stupid and thought I could just bus it next time, so I tried my best not to envision driving off the mountain roads. There were two other foreigners, our new boss and his buddy. Boss and buddy spent the time joking around and laughing with each other in Cantonese. I tried to get my mind off the driver by making small talk with two other foreigners who seemed uncomfortable as well. When we reached the little mountain town, we were told that we needed to get passport photos for ID. We paid, which felt scammy, but I shrugged it off. Then I asked to use the washroom, but there was none. I had to walk down the street with my boyfriend until we found one. When we went back to the passport shop, everybody was gone. We panicked a bit and text messaged our boss. He told us that he would be back to get us at 1 a.m. It was 6 p.m. As we stood there on the side of the street, already feeling the cold, one of the guys we had met on the bus ran up. I was so relieved to see him, I asked him where our other new friend was. He had been abandoned as well and had already hopped on a bus to get out of there. My new friend told me that he spoke Cantonese. He said that these guys were bad news and that they had been talking and laughing about their plans for me. I couldn't get him to explain it any more than that. He just didn't want to tell me. The problem was our bags were still in the van. I sent a message saying that we could wait until 1, but I had medication in my bag that I needed to take now, so we needed the bags. A drunk guy showed up and he looked completely bewildered as we grabbed their bags. Our new friend helped us get on the right bus back to the city. He was pretty awesome. I thanked him profusely enough. They kept messaging me for a while, asking what happened, telling me they still wanted me to work for them. Never messaged my boyfriend, and I never responded. I wonder what their plans were, but I don't like to think about it. If that guy hadn't warned us, we would have stuck around though. So, thanks again. I always think I have no experiences appropriate for this subreddit, but thinking about times I've listened to a gut feeling or foreboding, I do think it once saved my ass, or at least all of my personal belongings. This happened last year in China. My husband and I arrived by train around 2 a.m. only to discover that the hotel room in Taiyuan that we'd booked had been given to somebody else and we had nowhere to stay for the night. This was actually not the first time we'd found ourselves on the streets of China with nowhere to stay that winter, funnily enough, so we were a bit stressed but not freaking out. We found a cheap hotel online, planning to stay one night and find somewhere nicer the next day, and took a cab over. It was hard to find, so when we got near, the driver called the hotel. A young guy in a tracksuit came out to the street to bring us up. He seemed pretty normal, if surprisingly energetic for 2 a.m. He took us into a rundown building through an alleyway entrance, and we took the elevator up to the 9th floor. The hallways were unfinished, just bare concrete and exposed wiring. We're led through a straight labyrinth of these halls till we get to the hotel. It's one hallway of rooms, 4 in total. I was pretty on board with everything till we got into that room. Then I started getting a bad feeling. I thought I was just being prissy at first because my primary problem was that there was no sink. Just a bed in a glass room with a squatter and a shower, normal at lower ends hotels in China, but I haven't been to one with no sink. Then I noticed there was a small window by the bed leading into the hallway with no covering on it. Then, while the guy was harassing my husband to try and wrangle more than the agreed price out of him, I noticed there wasn't even a proper lock on the door. I was really not feeling it at this point, and my gut was telling me we should go. My husband wanted to stay. Remember, it's cold and it's 2 a.m. and we've been on a train all day and we're tired. But I insisted we leave. That's when it got really weird. When we came in, there was no sign of another living soul in the building except for us and the young guy. No other guests and no other employees. The place didn't even seem to have a front desk. But when we started walking down the hall, the track-suited young guy followed us and started begging us to stay. Then all of a sudden, about 10 more people came out of nowhere, and they were all following us down the hall, begging us, some of them yelling and touching us to stay. I don't think so. So we left and spent the next hour and a half at a 24-hour KFC down the road and ended up spending 3 times the price for a soft bed and some peace of mind. Well worth it. I had to think about it, but I believe this happened in the 6th grade. It's hard for me to believe that this took place 20 years ago. One thing I don't remember is what our science project was exactly. All I know is that I got partnered up with this kid in my class named Brian. He seemed like a chill kid at school. He was chubby, quiet, and kind of shy even. When I went to his house to work on our project for the first time, he was apparently much more comfortable and seemed to be very outgoing. He made jokes and laughed a lot more than usual. Kept saying stuff to his mom in Spanish, and then they would both laugh at me. But I never thought it was really that mean, and I would laugh along, even though I didn't know what they were saying. Usually right afterwards, he would tell me what they had supposedly said. At one point, we were in his room, and he asked me to go ask his mom for a line of paper. I told him I didn't speak Spanish and he should go ask her, but he said he would just tell me how to say it. I don't remember exactly, but he told me to say something like it. So I went and asked his mom. I knew something was off right away just by the way she looked at me, like I had said something crazy. She grabbed my hand and walked me to the bathroom like I was a special little boy. Once we were in the bathroom, she pointed at the toilet paper with that confused look still on her face as if to say, Where the heck else would it be? I was confused and could only speak to her in English while she spoke to me in Spanish, and we didn't understand each other. Soon we heard Brian having a hilarious laughing fit from the other room. Laughing so hard like he thought it was the funniest thing ever, but I was pretty sure it was only kind of funny. I wasn't worried though, and I laughed it off. Haha, you got me. Eventually, he became really excited to show me something. He told me he'd be right back, and then he ran out of his room. He was gone for a minute or so and then returned, telling me to follow him. He was so sure that I was going to love whatever he was about to show me, so I was excited too. Couldn't wait. We get outside and he goes to this little shed and pulls out a lawnmower. He tells me to follow him. He started the mower, began walking, and then gestured with his hand again for me to follow him. As we walked, we rounded a corner and there on the ground was a net full of frogs. There were maybe 20 or more frogs in there. I didn't have time to stop him. Right before it happened, we looked at each other. Him looking at me to make sure I was looking, and me looking at him in pure confusion. He pulled back on the mower, raising the blades, and then let the weight of the spinning blades fall down on the writhing pile of frogs. The mower bogged down just for a split second, and there was a sickening wet crunching sound, followed by chunks being spit everywhere as he raised the blades back up. He raised the blades and let them fall on the pile of frogs 4 or 5 times. All the while he was staring at my face and laughing maniacally at my horrified reaction. He released the bar and the mower went silent as he crumpled to the ground and began rolling around on the grass laughing. A couple of frogs escaped without getting blended. A few more frantically scattered away from the mower, missing limbs. I awkwardly laughed with him and played along like nothing bad had just happened. I never get disgusted to the point of throwing up, and it's hard to disgust me at all. But from that point I definitely knew there was something wrong with Brian. And until now, I've never told anyone. I wouldn't say that I was afraid. It was just that I didn't think it was a good idea to tell anybody what had happened. Not his mom and not my friends. Not my parents, not my brother or sister or best friend. I didn't tell anyone anything about it, and Brian never did anything like that again or mentioned it. It was the weirdest thing. They say it's the quiet ones you've got to watch out for. I haven't seen him since 6th grade ended, but sometimes I wonder just what kind of person he turned out to be. I've never been a girl who has scared easily. I routinely watch crime shows, horror movies, and stuff. However, a night in March 2005 changed all of that for me. I was attending college for music in 2005 and had recently seen one of my favorite violinists. Inspired, I had asked a pianist friend to accompany me while I played a piece. Looking back, it wasn't smart on our part to go at night to the college's music practice rooms, which are nearly soundproof and separated from the rest of the building. I figured since it was across the street from the campus police headquarters, we would probably be okay. Was I ever wrong? My friend and I are in the practice room for about 15 minutes when she looks at me and says, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy with a mask behind you." Now, this is college. There are plenty of stupid people doing stupid stuff all of the time. When I turned around, I realized this was something much more sinister. There, crouched on the other side of the practice room's glass door, is a thin guy about 5'7", maybe 5'8", wearing a thin blonde curly wig. The Groucho Marx glasses / nose combo thing, a hideous shirt, just a personal judgment, and the creepiest smile ever. That's right, no pants or underwear, just his small penis out. When I turn around, he waves and enters this tiny practice room. My friend and I try to remain calm because we honestly don't know what to do. Then this guy tries to strike up small talk with us and mentions he heard me talking about my favorite violinist. Apparently, he's been standing outside the practice room the entire time. He knows our names, where I had gone that day, where our hometown is, my guy problems at the time, etc. As soon as possible, my friends and I booked it out of there. He was blocking the door most of the time, so we were really scared. As we are leaving, he says, "Let's do it again," with my name. Of course, we go to the campus police department immediately, and they think it's all pretty funny. The next day, I'm sitting in choir when the dean comes in and says, "Hey, a friend of your cousin stopped by today. He said he wanted to give you some CDs of my favorite violinist. He asked for the girl who played violin with your first name, so I assumed it was you." I tell him what happened and he's furious because the campus security didn't do anything. That's when the stalking began. He soon was clever enough not to go by the music office again, but my dorm neighbors would tell me a guy was looking for me to give me some kind of gift. One time a stack of CDs from various violinists was sitting in my assigned seat for choir. Another time they were outside my door. All the while the campus security is doing nothing. Some people even suggested that I should enjoy the attention. Things died down when I finally moved off campus and stopped altogether, when I moved away from the college town. Until 2 years ago when I moved back to the same town. The first week back, I received a direct message on Twitter saying, "Glad you're back. I've missed you. Let's get together and listen to." Insert violinist name here. I reported it to the police, who haven't caught the person to my knowledge. All they knew is the address came from somewhere other than my city. Part of me is still waiting for the knock on the door, or a present left at my work or home. In Pennsylvania, right near the border into Delaware, there is a narrow, eerie place with deformed trees, closed-off paths, and lots of legends. It is formerly known as Devil's Road, the main attraction in a place called Satansville, which encompasses the whole of dark twists, isolated roads, and unsettling encounters. It was written about in the book Weird Pennsylvania, which highlights the creepy places of the state. According to many rumors, there is a cult house hidden in the woods surrounding the road, and any trespassers on the road, especially those who stop, will be chased out with a black or white SUV or truck. For years, I had read about the place and heard spine-chilling stories until I couldn't stop thinking about seeing it for myself. My friend Matt and I spent almost every Friday night at the mall together, as teenagers do. As expected, it can get pretty boring pretty fast, especially with no money to actually have a motive to shop around for anything other than disappointment. Visiting Satansville without telling our parents became another weekly tradition of sorts after he told me about his experience a month before our first visit. He had told me that when he visited with his guy friends, his phone service completely cut out, leaving them without Google Maps in a potentially dangerous, unclear area that was already scarcely mapped. Soon after, he told me, a black truck came off of a dirt road and followed closely behind them until they found the main road. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to be hooked. Not too much happened on our first few trips. We would see other cars rarely, as it's a hidden road that is no longer marked due to excessive theft of the street sign. Occasionally, the cars would be black in color, and we would get a rush of adrenaline. It was fun, but not exactly terrifying, until one night. We finished up at the mall around 6, and we left with enough time to circle around once or twice in daylight, and the remainder of the time in the dark. It was about a 40-minute drive to Satansville from the mall, and I was tingling with excitement. According to the legends, cars that visit frequently are more likely to have experiences at this place, and this would be our third time visiting in the last few weeks. Instead of Matt and I going alone this time, we brought our friend Lola, who was very outgoing and would likely have a sense of humor in a situation that we'd be too scared to continue in normally. We drove down the highway and finally made the first turn, leading to the seclusion. Matt and I had pinpointed several areas where we thought the cult house may be, but stopping on the road is illegal, so we never had a real chance to explore. At least, that's the logical reason I give in lieu of us being major cowards. The ambience immediately changed as we entered Satansville, and the cool night air flooded through the cracked windows. In the first few turns, other people aren't entirely a rare sight. A few trucks pulling out of driveways they like. However, the turn onto Devil's Road never loses its wow factor. The trees on both sides of the narrow road lean away from the forest aggressively. Not just a tilt, but completely bending in the trunk away from things we could only imagine. We were approaching the first major bend in the road, and a car was coming up towards us. It was a tight squeeze, nearly impossible for two opposing vehicles to pass. The presence of a car alone was enough to cause a twinge in my gut. Matt was focused on squeezing by while turning, and Lola was too busy cracking jokes to see what I saw, but I have never forgotten the face since then. I looked over to the white Jeep to my left, and the window was incredibly tinted but half down, looking back at me straight into my eyes like he had been looking at me long before I looked to him. He was a young man, maybe 25, with long blonde hair, a deathly pale face, and horribly thin fingers on the steering wheel. He was not at all focused on driving, as his eyes pierced me, and this is the worst part. His neck was turned completely towards me, while the rest of his body was completely straight forward. This may not sound creepy, but it was not normal to bend that way. He said something, but I couldn't hear him over Lola and Matt, laughing at our antics. I couldn't break his gaze. I was stuck staring at him until finally Matt passed the bend and he was gone. I kept checking the rearview windows, terrified with a feeling I'd never quite felt before. When I could no longer see the Jeep, though it felt as though he could still see me, I quietly asked my friends if they'd seen him. Neither of them had looked at him nor felt anything unusual. I was pretty unsettled, yet excited to see what else would happen. We turned off Devil's Road, but were still in Satansville, preparing to loop back around, when we passed a little shack that always housed 2 black trucks. There was no sign of any other drivers, and we wanted to stir the pot a little bit. We stopped for a few moments and honked the horn and flashed our blinkers, and then kept driving. We also blasted Old Town Road for some reason, because that was our peak of comedy at the time. We looped back around, and were back on Devil's Road when Matt stopped mid-sentence to adjust his mirror. In the darkening distance was a black truck. We giggled with nervous excitement and kept driving. It was exciting, but it kept a reasonable distance, and I think we all kind of assumed it was a coincidence. That is, until we turned off Devil's Road once more and saw that there were no trucks parked by the shack anymore. We lost the truck when we turned on the main road to circle back around again. We circled around 2 more times, nervous but skeptical, and not much happened other than an ass-riding white SUV that kept blinking its headlights. Not going to lie, that freaked us out. And the return of 1 truck to the shack. This is where it gets really intense. On our 5th loop, we were all very tense. The aura had changed to heavy, and it was completely dark at this point. Things had started to feel more ominous. Probably from the slightly less passive actions taken towards us by whoever was there. We went down the bends, peering nervously into the woods. Some trees were marked with 666 and upside-down crosses. Marks of other, more ballsy teenagers, and there was a distant light in the woods. Courtesy of who knows what. As we turned off Devil's Road, but still in the heart of Satansville, headlights appeared behind us. It was impossible to tell what kind of car it was, as it was pitch black and we had just turned the first major bend. Moments later, the truck appeared behind us, speeding. We were going about 25 probably, and the truck must have floored it to catch up, and it drove uncomfortably close to us. I was the one to see it first. It was a black truck, windows tinted and driver unknown. We drove on for a minute, freaking out and turning completely behind us like creepy Jeep guy. But more normally. Soon, a second truck joined behind it at a fork in the road, and they revved their engines as if in communication. The truck sped up, nearly crashing into us, and we were forced to speed up. This continued through many intense twists and turns where our speed reached up to 70 at the maximum. They flashed their lights, kept speeding up and getting closer. At this point, we were losing our stuff. They were definitely either going to run us off the road or catch us and do who knows what to us. They had these weird red lights on the tops of their trucks, and the light was reflecting off every window in our tiny Honda. Just above a small hill, the main road was visible and relief flooded us. We panicked again, though when we realized we would have to wait for traffic to slow before we could turn, and they would definitely catch us. With nothing else to do, we stopped and glanced behind us. The trucks were gone. We all expected a sudden ambush, but made the turn onto the highway and started home, talking about what the heck just happened. Came to the conclusion that the trucks had probably turned onto a dirt road, only visible to those who know it's there, and that they were chasing us away from their activities. Like the rumors say, what were they doing exactly? We have no idea, and we have no intention of finding out, as we hadn't been back since, and I still can't get the face and presence of the man in the Jeep out my head, and this was over a year ago now. I was a teenager in the 90s, and on this particular night, had found myself stuck downtown. It was around midnight when I finally found a semi-well-lit bus stop. I looked at the bus schedule and realized I may have missed the last bus of the night, unless it was late. I decided to wait on the bench. Moments later, a tall man walked up and sat right next to me. There was plenty of space to sit elsewhere for him, but he huddled up nice and close. He was wearing all black, including a black leather jacket. He started making smooth conversation with me, and I finally looked over at him. He was very tan and had shiny wavy black hair and orange eyes, like bright hazel orange, snake-looking eyes, which contrasted with his dark features and clothes. He really looked like the devil in person to me. He took off his leather jacket and laid it across my lap to keep me warm. I took it off and handed it back to him and said no thanks. He kept draping it back on my lap. I looked around for other people and only saw a passed out homeless person sleeping on the bench. He was trying to coerce me into getting a ride with him because it's so late and he was worried about me. And my bus isn't coming, I'm not safe. I said, no thanks, my bus should be here any minute. In my mind, I didn't know if the bus would be here at all. The streets were dead and dark, and I was scared to leave the only spot that was well lit. After what seemed like an eternity, my bus finally came. It was the most beautiful bus I'd ever seen. I quickly got up and said, my bus is here. He sneered at the bus and said under his breath, you got lucky. I got on the bus and saw out the window him walking to his car in a dark parking lot across the street from where the stop was. He stood next to his car waving at me to come to him, as if that would change my mind. It obviously did not. I was a wild teen that partied a lot and would stay downtown all hours of the night and thought I was invincible. But after that incident, I never stayed out that late again, especially alone. I really did get lucky and had no intention of pushing it again. I went to school in New Orleans from 2010 to 2012, and I encountered the scariest man I've ever known while attending. My friend from high school and I both lived there at the time. We met up to smoke a small joint on the outskirts of a nearby park. She was struggling heavily with money, for both tuition and everything else, and I was smoking her out for a pick-me-up. While smoking, a man emerged from a white house across the street from the park, one of the nice Garden District homes. He carried his bike over his shoulder and was headed straight for us. We quickly put out our joint when we saw his eyes locked on us, and we initiated friendly conversation. He introduced himself as Ty. He was tan with piercing blue eyes, probably in his late 30s, and seemed pretty athletic. We asked if the nice house was his, and he said he was staying with his friends. He ran back and retrieved 2 beers for us, both unopened, so we accepted. This was a poor choice, but he was insistent. We were already pretty high, and we were a little afraid that he would screw us over if we said no. He pulled out a ring of cards while telling us how he was a model, refusing to tell us what exactly he'd done in the past. The cards all seemed pretty worn and old, but he insisted that they were his press passes. He noticed immediately that I was asking some overly specific questions and was pretty uncomfortable, while my friend, much more trusting, was enthralled. He latched onto her, telling her that he was doing a shoot in New Orleans for the Saints, working for ESPN. She would be paid, he said, and saw her light up upon hearing this. Her phone was off, so she told me to give him my number to communicate. I was pretty mad at this point. He kept making backhanded comments intended to make me feel like the outsider for questioning him. It's not for everyone. This is how you make it in this world with a pretty face. And things of that nature. Putting on a show of fawning over my friend. Sociopaths tend to single people out like that, I learned. I soon heard from him on a daily basis. He would ask how his little lady was doing, my friend, ask for her Facebook and ask for her class schedule, and I told him that I doubted she would be okay with that. She would have been, but she was playing a dangerous game, so I tried to intercept his advances. He found me on Facebook soon enough, though my information was not linked to my number, and I was receiving messages constantly asking for my friend. I thought that if I blocked him, he would continue to hunt me down in crazier ways, or tell somebody about the weed. Young and stupid. So I allowed the barrage of messages. I refused to help him and made my friends aware that he was starting to scare me. I was leaving town with my friend a few months later for Christmas, and told him the week before we actually left that we were both gone indefinitely, as his messages got more and more aggressive as time went on. He freaked out, but it seemed like he would leave me alone in the end. However, every time I went to the park, which was daily in my last week because I was smoking a ton of pot after finals, just keeping it real here, I would see him on his bike, circling the track around the park. I didn't think much of it, nor did I think he could see me because I was with a group and away from the track, and he never acknowledged anyone being there. The day before we actually left, I received several blurry images of the original friend and me lying in the grass on the different days we came together, which wasn't every time I was there. It was obvious that we were smoking pot, so again, young and foolish, we didn't go to the cops. When I got back to my dorm on the same day, placed on the sidewalk by the back entrance I always used, which was rarely trafficked, was an ESPN press pass with the name Tyler Durden, piercing blue eyes staring up at me. It was like it had been laid right in the center of the walkway. That was probably the most frightening moment of my life, and I packed up and stayed with friends until my flight out. I received phone calls from numbers I didn't have throughout Christmas, making my life miserable. Every sound in my house I feared would be him, finding me at the address with my name attached to it. He was livid, texting in all caps from various numbers that I was a little liar, that I was just a stoner and I was never model material and I was jealous of my smoking friends, implying that he knew of more than just one of my friends. That liars get raped and he would destroy my pothead life. And he'd go into really weirdly worded babbling rants that scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I was scared to tell anyone in my life. I was the good kid who had gotten herself into the stupidest situation. I just hoped he would move on. A week before I was supposed to go back to school, he just stopped. From daily rampages and rants to nothing. I was so relieved until in February I checked my email to find a crime alert warning students of a serial rapist going by Tyler Durden, who lured women to his home, gave them alcohol and assaulted them. His real name is Dean Kelly. A has-been model from an Aerosmith video, baiting, stalking, and assaulting underage girls at schools in Chicago, Texas, and New Orleans. He keeps making it out of jail on bail and contacting his victims, pretending to be other victims who want to talk. Thankfully, I'm not one of them. Screw this guy. I still live in fear years later. I've told bits and pieces of the story to people before, but I don't think I've ever shared the whole story in one piece. I also have to apologize for some of the details being a bit blurry to me. This is for two reasons. A. People may have lied to me about some of the circumstances, and B. Drugs were involved. For the record, I'm male, and at the time of the story I was 15 or 16. So when I was a lot younger, maybe 13, I got mixed up with a few of the wrong people, and we started experimenting with all kinds of drugs and doing all kinds of illegal things. This all culminated in one summer in junior high when I realized I was going down the wrong path, and so I got away from these people. Fast forward to my freshman year of high school, I got a random message on MySpace from one of the people I used to hang out with. This girl may have been the most screwed up out of all of them. I actually had a long history with her. We went all the way back to kindergarten. She liked to come up with names for herself that she thought made her sound edgy. At this time, she was going by Death Cake. Anyways, Death Cake told me that she wanted to catch up and that she had gotten herself together. Apparently, she just got out of rehab and was having a welcome home party. Being silly and young, I thought she really might have gotten it together, so I figured why not. It turned out that this party was really just me, her, and two other people. One of the other two people was a guy I'd never met before. He told me his real name, but also told me that he would like me to call him Snow. Alright, sure, I'll go with that. These people just like nicknames. Snow says he's 18 and spends most of the night making passes at me. I'm polite but clearly not interested. Everything in general is getting weird here, and I'm starting to get a little uncomfortable. I started getting my stuff together to leave when they begged me to stay a little bit longer. I figured fine. I guess the least I could do is celebrate her soberness with her. Then after that, I never have to hang out with them again. Now throughout the course of the night, I saw Snow pull Death Cake aside to talk to her privately. In the beginning, he wasn't really suspect, but a few times I noticed whenever he pulled her aside, sometimes he would look directly at me while he spoke with her. Death Cake brings out what she called herbal tea. Damn, I don't know how I could have been so young and stupid to drink that tea. That was the last thing I remember that night. The next day I wake up in my living room. I figured he must have had some drinks or something like old times. Got carried away. They dropped me off and I let myself in for another night of getting away with some illegal fun. The day after that, I started getting messages on AIM from somebody I never remembered talking to. He was very nice and kept referring to himself as my secret admirer. Mind you, at this point, I still really didn't remember anything from that night. So this dude keeps messaging me saying really nice things. I was actually kind of flattered. 3 or 4 days after that night at Death Cake's house, he tells me he has a present for me. He tells me to check my mail. 5 minutes later, I check. There in my inbox are 3 pictures of a naked dude. I realize I've seen his face before. I also realize I've seen his penis. It's Snow. Suddenly, details of the night at Death Cake's house start coming back to me. Then I freak out and realize exactly what must have happened. Now, before anybody judges me for not going to the authorities immediately, let me just say that I knew if I told anyone that all of the details of my past illegal doings would have also come to the surface, and I wasn't about to let that happen. Instead, I figured that I would just never have to see this guy in any context again, so I kindly just told him to screw off and leave me alone. And just when you thought this was going to be a simple story, it gets much crazier. Snow. This dude left me alone for another few days, then I got a text message from a number I'd never seen. I love you, it said. And who the heck would send me that? I figured just leave it alone and don't reply. I love you, we have something special. All I can think at this point is no. Still, I'm hoping he will eventually wear himself out and forget about me. Now I have blocked his instant message account, so I got a shock when a new one starts messaging me. Except instead of words, it's numbers and pictures. 30, then a picture of a rope. 34, another rope. I'm sure you can imagine the bricks I shat when I realized he was quoting my pant size. Then all of a sudden something cracked in my head and I went full on berserk via instant message. I told him to leave me alone and that we would never be together, especially considering what he did. He told me if I wasn't going to cooperate, he would just have to lock me away so I could be his forever. This is when I finally threatened him with calling the police. I gave him a whole bunch of stuff about how I have a family in law enforcement. Not really true, but whatever, and if he ever tried to lay another finger on me, I would stop at nothing to see him rot away in prison for the rest of his life. Turns out this was surprisingly effective. I expected him to become more threatening, but instead he seemed more sad. Like genuinely sad. But obviously I wasn't going to try to help him. He started saying all this crazy stuff, which I just ignored until he stopped. Once he did, he never contacted me again. I heard 3 days later from one of the people who was there that night that he ended up dead. A few months later, the same person told me that he almost died. This same source also told me that once he got out, he was coming for me. This is the part that I'd mentioned earlier, where I said I wasn't sure what to believe. This person who told me all of this was completely unreliable and a drug addict and had a history of terrorizing people in our high school, so who honestly knows what actually happened to Snow? I certainly don't. I haven't heard from him or about him from anyone since. These days, I'm a lot less terrified. I'm almost 22 now, and for the most part my mental scars have been replaced with my ability to smell a creep a mile away, which has helped me help friends out of similar situations. So, there's that. Out of respect for everybody's privacy, names in this story will be changed. The important people to know are me and my cousin, whom I'll call Drew. Some of the prominent neighborhood kids will call Josh, Kylie, and Evan, and of course Gabe. To set the story, this was around the time my mom and dad divorced. It wasn't a clean divorce and there was a lot going on around this time. My mom had to move out of the school district and into a small home quickly, and my dad kept the house in our neighborhood. I bring this up to explain that although my 2 brothers decided to stay with my dad, I and my cousin, who lived with us most of his life, decided to move in with my mom. The issue was that my mom's new place wasn't within the school district, which meant no buses. So the setup was that she'd bring us to school before work, and after school we would catch the bus to my dad's house and stay there for a couple of hours until she got off work. Now that everything is explained, let's get into what you're really here for. There were quite a few kids in our neighborhood, and I guess you could say we all got along and hung out quite a bit. We would all ride the bus together, hang out after school, and heck, even try to build forts in the moss. The moss was a spot in the woods where you could access through a small opening at the end of a cul-de-sac. This is important for later. It was an everyday thing for us, until one day a new family had moved into the neighborhood, and with them was their son Gabe. He had brown hair and he was skinny. We first met Gabe on the school bus, and us being curious about a new kid in our neighborhood, we were all eager to talk to him. You'd probably think we got some vibe off of him, Or maybe something about him was creepy, but honestly, he just seemed like a regular kid to me. He seemed to fit in with the other kids in the neighborhood. It became normal to see me, Josh, Kylie, Drew, Evan, and Gabe hanging out, rather than all of us or a combination of the few. After getting to know him, we learned that Gabe actually used to go to our school but got expelled after he threw stuff at a teacher, and only just that school year let him back into our school. Back then, we brushed it off as something edgy he did, but knowing the events now, it should have been the first red flag. You see, Gabe, Drew, and I became close. I'd argue closer than the other kids. I would have considered him a friend instead of just another neighborhood kid to hang out with, which is why we didn't immediately drop him off after the following events. I wasn't there for this, but I heard about it after the fact. Drew and I got on the bus one day, and immediately I noticed Gabe wasn't there. We sat next to each other every day on the bus. I just assumed that he was absent, and Drew decided to sit by me. Kylie and Evan, who sat near us, started talking about something that happened, and we joined into their conversation. Apparently, not long after Drew and I left to go into my mom's, Gabe had invited Kylie, Evan, and Josh to his house. Now, I don't remember what set this in motion or what really happened, but the hangout ended with Gabe chasing Josh home, with a knife in his hands. Josh lived on the other side of the neighborhood, and once he got home, his mom came out to see what was going on, as she heard him yelling for her from the front yard. When she stepped out, Gabe chased both of them inside. The scariest part, they heard from Josh that he was laughing and had a smile on his face as he did so, like he enjoyed terrorizing them. The cops were called, and honestly, I don't know what came out of that other than Gabe was gone from school for a few days after. When he came back, he acted like it never happened. The kids in our neighborhood started growing apart from Gabe after that, especially John, whom I never actually saw talk to him again. I mean, who would blame him? I guess I felt bad for Gabe a little bit, but my stupid brain must have decided it was a bad prank that went too far or something like that. How dumb was I? I truly believe Gabe changed after that, like something had clicked in his brain. Not long after this, we were on the bus and I was talking to him as we sat in the same seats. All of a sudden, he just pulled out a pencil and tried to stab me with it. Not only did he try, but he also did stab me, right in the neck. Luckily, it only broke the skin, but it shocked me. He laughed like he was joking, and I decided to move seats. When I got off, I felt the need to explain what happened to the bus driver. I never should have done that. I believe to this day that one choice caused what happened next. He was kicked off the bus for a couple of days. When he returned, they made him sit at the front of the bus. He knew it was me who snitched on him. When I'd walk past him to get off the bus, he would glare at me and it felt evil. He called me names and a snitch, and I was honestly scared of him. Fast forward a week later, and all the kids in our neighborhood just decided that they wouldn't hang out with Gabe anymore, and I wish I could say the same. Even after everything I had just spilt to you all, I was not even dumb. Eventually, he messaged me apologizing and messaged me to ask if Drew and I wanted to hang out. I don't know why, but we agreed. I think I remember him saying that he and some other kids were going to hang out in the moss and build some forts, and I think that's why we agreed, because other kids would be there. So we set off to meet him at his house, which was just down the street from ours. We knocked on his door and he answered it, holding a knife. Screw the red flag. I was ignoring a whole red alarm at this point. It was a kitchen knife with some sort of orange handle. With a huge smile on his face, he held his arm up and just started swinging it all around. We should have just left right then and there. Why didn't we just leave? After a couple more agonizing seconds, he laughed like he was some sort of joke. It wasn't until now that I realized this kid was actually psychotic, like something was really wrong with him. He had a couple of tools with him and told us to follow him to the moss. For some reason, we did. I was holding out, hoping that he'd be normal when all the other kids would be there. We got to the small opening to the moss and walked in. To get to the small pond in the moss, you had to go down a slightly steep hill and through the brush, and you'd be there. I bet you could feel my surprise when I realized nobody else was there. I looked at Gabe, who just chuckled. They must be late. Let's just get started, he said to me. Both Drew and I were on edge, and I bet Gabe could feel it. Hey, go find some sticks and logs to build the fort, he told me. He pointed over towards the pond. I obeyed and made my way over to the area. About 10 or 15 seconds after I started walking, I just got the feeling to turn around, and I'll never stop thanking God for just doing that. Gabe was there creeping up on my cousin, who was picking up a large rock. He had a hoe-looking tool in his hand, raising it slowly. I shouted, "Hey," towards them. My cousin jolted up, and Gabe quickly lowered the hoe and looked at me in confusion. I ran up to them, telling them my mom messaged me and that it was time to go. This was a lie. My phone only worked on Wi-Fi at the time. I felt that Gabe knew that I saw him, so I grabbed my cousin, who didn't for a second question me, and we quickly started leaving. And at that moment, he chased us. We booked it through the woods for a solid half of a minute and got to the steep part, quickly climbing up it. I looked back and saw Gabe with the face I could only describe as a psychopath, chasing us still. I prayed that we wouldn't slip or fall, and thankfully we didn't. Luckily, Gabe struggled a little bit, giving us time to bolt out the entrance. He ran halfway up the street and turned around. Gabe wasn't there. In fact, we never saw him leave. We went home, and the next day we told some of the other kids what happened. The weirdest part is, though, we never saw Gabe again, not on the bus or at school. Very shortly after, his parents moved from that house, and my dad moved out of that neighborhood a year later, with my mom finding a newer house in our school district. This was years ago. I recently looked Gabe up to see whatever happened to him, but nothing came up. No Facebook page or Instagram, nothing. It's like he just vanished. Like he never even existed in the first place. But I know he did. I don't live anywhere near there anymore, and I'm thankful for that. Gabe, I don't know where you are or what happened to you. I'm a female, and I was 16 years old when this began. My home life wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst. I had been dating a guy for about 9 months who was a nice guy, but our feelings towards one another just weren't mutual, so I ended it. My mom was very upset over this. Moving on, however, I met another boy in school named Leo that I thought was cute for a while. After some correspondence between friends, because that's how it was done back then, he asked me out and we began dating. The second my mom heard his last name, she gave me a hard time. He had a European last name, and she was not a fan of a specific nationality and their treatment of women. This was my mother, who was and is severely on the left and always loves to preach tolerance, so I was immediately put off by her attitude and told her so. Leo was a nice kid. He was nice to me and got good grades. I did not. I hated school and was always respectful to other people. We had a good time together. My mom really never even acknowledged him and always made fun of his nationality, which upset me to no end. Now, my mom and I had been having trouble for years, so this was nothing new. It seemed almost all of my choices and actions were met with disapproval, even if I weren't breaking any rules. The only thing I noticed about Leo was that he never brought me home or introduced me to his parents. I knew his brother, but that was about it. Then I realized he really didn't bring anyone around his house except for kids he was related to or who were the same nationality as him. I had grown up with a couple other kids of certain nationalities who behaved the same way, so I just accepted it and didn't really bring it up or think much about it. The trouble started as soon as he began bringing me around his cousins who didn't go to school with us. I began to realize why he kept me away. They were not like him at all. They were very loud, rough, and carried guns, often getting into fights. There were never really any other girls or women around, and he didn't bring me around much. It was usually just to pop in and say hello or drop something off or to pick them up. It was during one of these trips I met his cousin Gianni. I had gone to pick up Leo at Gianni's apartment, and Gianni was very drunk and loud, coming to my car, telling me how beautiful I was and giving me his entire pack of smokes when I asked for one, because such a pretty girl shouldn't have to spend money on them, he said. Leo was also a bit drunk and happy to see me. He told me to just drive away because Gianni was obnoxious. About a week later, my girlfriends and I were going out, and it was Leo's birthday, the next day. His friends had gotten a room and had some beer and were going to have a get-together. My friends and I went out and planned to meet up with them later that evening. About halfway through the evening, Leo and I connected by phone, and he said they'd been kicked out of the hotel room. It was common where I live for kids to get to hotel rooms and get booted as soon as the staff saw they were bringing booze into the room and too many kids were coming in, so they were going to Gianni's, and it might be better to call off meeting up. It was fine with me. Fast forward to about 2 a.m., I was sleeping at my friend's house and her phone rang. We didn't have cell phones, but she had her own phone line in her room. Most of us did. She picked it up and it was Gianni, of all people. He asked for me. I can't remember the jumbled reason he had her number, but he asked me if Leo came to hook up with me. I said no, we decided to not get together this night. He proceeds to tell me that Leo left his place around 10 p.m. after opening one of Gianni's drawers and grabbing some condoms, saying that he'd need them. I'm going to point out that Leo and I had been sexually intimate, and we had a birth control and condom routine that we'll say didn't leave him needing to grab any from Gianni. Leo calls me the next day. I ask him what he ended up doing the night before, and he tells me that he just went to Gianni's and went home at around 1:30 a.m. We hang up, and I don't talk to him for the rest of the day. I'm thinking about what to do and say here. Monday morning arrives, and he's there to meet me for our first period class, which we had together. By that time, I had allowed myself to become angry and believe Gianni. He asked me what was wrong. I told him he was a liar and confronted him about the story discrepancy. And he told me Gianni was lying and to please not talk to Gianni anymore, because he was a liar and was just trying to sleep with me. Gianni called me several times after that and convinced me there was a reason Leo didn't bring me around his family, and that it was because he was just using me for sex and he thought of me as too slutty to bring around his parents. Looking back, I think I subconsciously allowed Gianni to manipulate me. I was having a lot of trouble at home with my mom, and on top of this, she was mean to Leo and constantly berated me for dating him. And I just wanted out of the house. Gianni had his own apartment. After a few more rounds of he said, she said, I broke up with Leo and began dating Gianni, who had let me run away and stay with him. His abusive nature quickly became evident. He began by telling me who to hang out with and who not to, hitting me when we argued, but I put up with it because, hey, it was better than being at home. I was with Gianni for a year. After a couple more months of being together, though, I had gone back home because my parents called the cops and threatened to have Gianni arrested for housing a minor. I was beaten and assaulted on many occasions during our relationship. He held guns to my head while locking me in the apartment, telling me I was going to die. I actually thought I was living my last moment several times. Finally, my senior year of high school, which I was barely getting through, I decided I was done. I broke up with him, and surprisingly, we stayed away from each other for 2 weeks with no drama. A nice boy had asked me to prom, and I was excited to go. Then I found out I was pregnant. I had become pregnant during a rage that resulted in Gianni assaulting me. It was our last encounter. He somehow knew. He called me out of the blue after 3 weeks and asked me if I got my period. I told him I hadn't. We went through a lot of drama with this, which ended in him beating me up and me having a miscarriage. Lots of horrible stuff. Somehow, in my memory, not as horrible as what followed. He blamed me for killing the baby because I had been the one to make him angry enough to beat me up. He started following me around town. I went to a doctor's appointment to talk to a therapist about everything that had happened, and when I came out, he was walking up the building. This was really my first encounter where I felt betrayal and rage. How did he know where I was? He hadn't followed me there. I had been on high alert watching for him. I ran back into the building and he followed me, telling me I'd better stop or he was going to cut my throat right there because he had nothing to lose. There happened to be a uniformed police officer walking out one of the offices. I asked the officer for help, told him Gianni would not let me leave and was threatening to kill me. The officer told me to leave and I did. I had to go pick something up from my grandma's house and then I headed home. As soon as I got home, Gianni was outside my house, talking to my dad. I drove by and didn't stop, they had both seen me. I drove about a mile up the road and headed back hoping he'd be gone. On my way back, he pulled up beside me and tried to run me off the road. I somehow got past him and made my way to the police station, where he pulled up on the sidewalk to try to block me from going in. This is now nuts. He was at the police station. I ran in and said I needed help. There was an officer outside who had stopped him, and he had the nerve to begin telling the officer that I had just aborted his baby without permission and he had a right to be angry at me. This event ended with me being told to go home, and I'm not sure what they told him. I do know he suffered no consequences. The following night, my friends and I were out for the evening, and when they pulled up to my house to drop me off, Gianni pulled up in his friend's car, their friend in the passenger seat. I didn't get out. My friend drove off in a hurry and began chasing us, 4 of us girls in the car. He repeatedly tried to run us off the road, and you could see his friend becoming angry and even a little bit scared, telling him to stop. Finally, again, the luck I had in this 2-day period, we see a cop who had someone pulled over on the side street. My friend pulled up behind the cop, who you can imagine looked angry and stressed out, as it could have been a threat. Gianni saw this and drove away. The officer followed us all home once he was done ticketing the driver of the car he had pulled over to make sure we got there safely. I ended up moving in with some relatives to try to hide from Gianni, but to no avail. Somehow he figured out where I was and started harassing my relatives and me just the same. He would call and leave long rambling messages on their answering machine about how I was going to pay and that they were all going to die just for helping me, that I wasn't worth it. He said horrible, explicit things about me that no relatives would want to hear about a teenage girl. I got several restraining orders and had to sit in the court next to him several times. The judge always granted the restraining orders because his behavior in court was so demonstrative. There were officers and other civilians who gave reports about him. For example, at one point during one of the hearings, the judge was addressing him, and suddenly, one walks up to the judge and says something. The judge demands that Gianni be arrested immediately and calls for a recess. I was so confused. Turns out he was standing with his hands behind his back and had been flipping me off. A lady sitting in front of me called one over and showed him. He was arrested repeatedly for breaking the restraining order. My mom had moved into a new rental house and I moved in with her. We hoped he wouldn't find the address, but he started calling. I couldn't figure out how he got the phone number. Well, during one of the many phone calls where I usually would just hang up on him, I asked him how he got the number. He said, I have a lot of things, and he began naming things. One of them had been a bathing suit I had left at my dad's house to dry after washing it. It had disappeared and I couldn't figure out what happened to it. He had gotten into my dad's house and looked at the phone book and found our number and address. One night, I had come home again from being out. It'd been about 6 months at this point. My mom's house was a beach bungalow. It was the main house, and there were 2 smaller guest houses behind it that were rented out. I came home and wanted to see if one of the people I'd made friends with was home, so I went around back. I saw they weren't there, and I went into my mom's house through the back door. I had a very bad feeling though. About an hour later, I was lying in bed and I heard something next to my window. It sounded like metal hitting the concrete walk. I sort of listened and then froze. I got up and told my mom that I could hear something and that I thought we needed to call the cops, but she just got up and looked outside and was snotty about it and told me there was nobody there and to go back to bed. I ended up falling asleep and woke up a couple hours later. There was light that would shine into my window from streetlights behind the house. I had the shade down, but I could see the shadow of somebody's hand reaching up and feeling around the window, and it looked like they tried to push the top panel down to see if they could open it. I knew it was him. I got up again and told my mom, and she shooed me away again, getting angrier at me. She told me not to call the cops because it's embarrassing and how I had caused the family enough embarrassment with the situation. I finally go back to sleep somehow, and when I wake up in the morning, I keep hearing noise. I finally storm back into my mom's room and tell her someone is there, and I'm not kidding. She looks out the window and sees Gianni running away from the side of the house. We see him run down the street and get into an old car that I recognize as belonging to a girl I went to school with who was his cousin. He had borrowed her car to break the law. The cops came, and thankfully he had proven his presence with fingerprints and "I love you" written in the dirt with his finger on my windowsill. Back to jail with him. About a year later, I was working in a movie theater. I hadn't heard from Gianni in about 10 months. I liked working there and was quickly making friends with a lot of the young people that I worked with. It was fun as most of my high school friends had moved away to go to school. It was the first time in a while I had friends in a fun environment to be around. So I was working in the concession stand one night on a busy weekend night. It was after most of the primetime shows, the 7 to 8 p.m. ones had started. One of the managers comes up to tell me that I have a phone call on the payphone. This didn't seem right to me. I got a little tense because nobody that I know should know the number to that phone. Still, my cousins like to come to the theater a lot, so I hoped it was one of them who had maybe written down the number in case they wanted to get a hold of me during work. I walked over to the phone and it was Gianni. He says to me, "You look awfully cute in that uniform. I see you flirting with all those guys you work with. You're a slut." And people say things like, my heart sank into my stomach. I see what they're trying to describe. I felt sheer panic. I just held the phone to my ear and looked around the lobby, which was quite large, trying to figure out if I could see anyone or if I could see him. It was rare for people to have cell phones back then, but it felt like he could see me. I don't remember doing it, but at some point I hung up and just stood there for a moment, trying to gain my composure so I could go back behind the counter and work. About a minute after I got behind the counter, my manager, who had told me about the call, came over to get me and asked me to go outside. We walked out front and he introduced me to a guy named John who was dressed in plain clothes. I had seen the staff talking to him a lot, but I hadn't worked there long yet, so I didn't know him. He was an undercover security guard hired by the movie theater company. He saw my demeanor when my manager told me I had a call, then he watched me take the call and react to it. He said he knew something was wrong. Gianni didn't surface that night, and I didn't hear from him again for about 6 more months. He would pop up every now and again just to let me know he was there, to make sure I didn't get too comfortable. It made me so angry for so long that somebody could just keep watching me and that I wouldn't know when they were doing it. I suffered with anxiety and paranoia for a long time because the reality of a situation like this is there is nothing anyone can really do. A restraining order doesn't keep somebody from stalking you, watching you, and snapping and choosing to kill you at any time. It has been 21 years, and Gianni still pops up every couple of years, trying to send me messages on classmates. I ignore him and never engage. I now live 2,500 miles from where all of this happened, and he lives several states away from me, but I know he could decide to come after me at any time, and there is nothing anybody could do. Leo unfortunately ended up becoming a product of his upbringing and environment. He was with some cousins and his brother one night driving in a car on a highway. He was in the back seat. A group of guys cut them off while driving, and his cousin chased them down in the car and shot and killed one of them. To finish this story, at one point while we were still together and I tried to break up with him, Gianni told me that he would kill my entire family. He said he would kill my grandma and talked about how he would get into her house and how easy it would be to break her neck. This made me sick and horrified for a long time. About 10 years later, my dad was telling me, completely unrelated, he didn't even bring up Gianni or relate this story to him, that my grandma had asked him for a gun because somebody had been trying to open her doors at night. They were jiggling the handles looking for an unlocked door, so he gave her a 12 gauge. She didn't want to load it, so he told her that when she heard someone trying the doors, to turn on the lights and walk around the house cocking it. He said seeing somebody walk around cocking a 12 gauge should scare them off. This makes me sick to this day. I knew immediately and still know that it was Gianni trying to get into her house. Thankfully, I have learned from my fast teenhood and have wised up a ton when it comes to dealing with people, but the second you see a person manipulating you and trying to control your actions, telling you what to do and what not to do, walk away. It's the best thing you can do for yourself and your family. This is the first and hopefully the last time I'm writing here, so I apologize if it's difficult to listen to, but I just wanted to share with you, as I think this is the right place and at the same time get this case out of my head. Context: I'm a 26-year-old male. The incident occurred a week ago in Colin, where I was invited by my friend and business colleague. At 8 o'clock in the evening, I was on my way home and sat down at the bus stop to wait. I was alone there, except for a girl sitting on the other side of the bus stop. It was almost empty. At first, I didn't pay any attention to her and was busy texting my friends. However, several minutes passed and the bus still didn't arrive. During this time, I put my phone aside and that's when I began to notice some obvious oddities, to the point of feeling very uncomfortable. The girl looked to be about 30 years old, thin, dressed in a black dress and long black boots, with a hat lying next to her seat. What confused me a little was her unhealthily pale skin, especially on her face. It was probably just makeup or something, and her bags under her eyes were outlined in black. Nothing unusual. I've seen many people with informal styles and appearances, but her eyes were so empty, lifeless and glassy. However, what really scared me was the way she looked at me, with obvious aggression, predatory like a python looking at a mouse. At the same time, she smiled weirdly and disgustingly, sometimes licking her lips and quietly humming some melody. And this went on for more than 10 minutes, non-stop. Never in my life have I felt such confusion and discomfort as I did at that moment. I just wanted to run away, but at the same time I didn't want to look like an idiot, especially since I had waited so long. I understand how silly this sounds from the outside, but I simply cannot describe how repulsive and frightening she looked at me. Her face was so scary at that moment. I just knew that something was wrong, and my instincts and intuition were screaming that this was not normal, that this should not be happening. In addition to what I saw, I just felt in my gut that this would not lead to anything good. Eye contact was unrelenting. She was still looking at me and I was trying to look away, at my watch and or phone, and so on. I felt very uncomfortable, but I tried to be friendly, greeted her and waved awkwardly, but she continued to stare silently. Then the situation began to deteriorate rapidly, and her behavior became more hostile. From passive aggression, she moved on to more open aggression. She began to breathe heavily, grind her teeth and squeak. Then my patience snapped. I stood up and shouted at her, "Please stop." I kept my distance and didn't go near her because I realized that she was probably on drugs or had mental health issues. At that moment, she seemed to fall silent and spoke for the first time, muttering, "I'm sorry." At that moment, I felt a little bit calmer and she even stopped staring at me. I texted my friends that I was still out and be a bit late getting home, and just then my heart skipped a beat. She let out a loud cry like a scream. The girl jumped up from her seat and started coming towards me, muttering some weird stuff in German. I was confused and gradually step by step prepared to retreat, until the girl suddenly started chasing me and rushing towards me. This crazy clung to me with her long sharp nails drawing blood and tried to bite me several times, tearing my shirt at the shoulders. I had no choice but to hit her between the ears, as it was a matter of my safety, health, and possibly my life. After that, I pushed her aside and in a few minutes managed to run to a small shop where there were some people. I briefly told them what happened to me, and they told me to call 110, which I did. My scratches on my arm were successfully treated by a local worker, for which I am very grateful to him. Later, I went to the police station and showed them my injuries and scars on my arm. I told them about the incident and they suggested that I file a report in order to bring the attacker to justice. However, I refused to do so because I was due to return to my homeland in 3 days and simply did not have time for all the red tape. I still don't know who this lunatic was or what motivated her, but here's my banal lesson. Never underestimate the number of crazy people around you, especially when it comes to big cities and if you are alone. I am a grown man and was able to stand up for myself, but imagine if a child or an elderly person had found themselves in the same situation. I'm afraid to imagine what would have happened next. This is not the worst or scariest thing that could happen in life, but it was so damn crazy and frighteningly absurd. This happened to me when I was 17. I was just about to graduate high school. I was homeschooled and very encouraged to pursue entrepreneurship. I was trying to establish a photography business that I could run after graduating. In order to build my portfolio, I decided to ask a few friends and acquaintances to model for me. I asked a girl I worked with if she and her husband would like to model a couples session for me. It could be a win-win, since they would receive free photos and I would get to add them to my website as sample work. We planned a day to meet, and I asked them to meet me at a local park one evening. Something you should know about this park is that it is pretty far out in the country. The park has soccer fields, baseball fields, a golf course, and walking trails, so it is on a large plot of land and fairly secluded. The only house in view of the park is the caretaker's home, directly across the street from the entrance. Unless there is an event or a weekend, there are usually not many people there. I felt pretty confident meeting the couple there because I was only planning to arrive about 15 minutes early to set up so I wouldn't be alone long. The park has an entrance where you can drive down a road into the parking lot to get all the sports fields, playground, and pond. The front of the park has a large grassy strip, which is where I was planning to set up for my photos. I bypassed the entrance and pulled into a little dirt section at the front of the park and began unloading all of my props. I was always taught to be a cautious person, especially as a young woman, so I took a quick glance to see if anybody was at the park. I saw one car in the parking lot and two guys tossing a ball in the baseball field, along with their pit bull. Across the street, I could see the caretaker out in her yard, so that made me feel a lot better. I decided I would just keep an eye out and continued setting up my stuff. I would glance up every now and then to make sure that the two men were still on the baseball field. I had no reason to believe that they would bother me, but something in my gut just told me to keep watching. The couple I was waiting on seemed to be running late, so I finished up my setup and glanced up to check on the two guys. To my horror, they were gone. The car was still there, but the men and the dog were nowhere in sight. There was a bit of a hill in front of me that blocked some of the park entrance from sight, so I thought maybe they had just decided to walk one of the nature trails. But again, that feeling in my gut just told me something was wrong. I looked at the caretaker's house and she had gone back inside. I couldn't get everything back to the car quickly, so I just grabbed my camera equipment and hopped in my car. I locked the doors, turned on the ignition, and got my phone out. Literally as soon as I got settled in my car, I saw the two guys coming over the hill with their dog. I feel my gut feeling melt into panic. You have to understand, there was no reason for them to come up to where I was. It's literally just an open grassy yard. If the dog needed to relieve himself, there was plenty of space for that at the wood's edge or the nature trail, or the walk to the pond, and all of which were way closer to them than where I was. They walked around my setup, and when they got to my car, one guy went around the front, and the one holding the dog on the leash circled my car. I assumed that they realized I had already noticed that they were coming, that I was no longer vulnerable because they rejoined and walked further up and around to the soccer field. Once I felt like I was no longer in danger, I glanced down at my phone to see that the couple I was supposed to meet had apparently forgotten about it and were at the beach. I was so fed up at that point I jumped out of the car, grabbed all of my stuff, and shoved them into the car. This was my first experience of how scary it can be to be a female out alone. I've had multiple experiences since, but this one sticks out to me the most because I'm absolutely certain that those guys intended to do me harm. And what kind of match would a 17-year-old girl be against two grown men in a pit bull? One thing is for certain, I will never go back to that park alone. A couple of years back, I lived for about a year and a half in Moscow. I mostly madly loved that city. I was studying Russian and naturally I fell in with a group of my fellow English Russian students and expats. It didn't do my liver any favors since we went out and sampled the chaotic nightlife at least once a week, often more often. I'm not a massive party animal and I can't stomach going home in the wee hours of the morning all the time, so often I'd catch the last train home rather than go to clubs and stay out till 5. A few quick facts for those not familiar with Moscow. 1. There are very strange people in that city sometimes. Man, I really love that place, but there are some proper oddballs. 2. The last metro train runs at about 1:30 a.m. I think. Unless you catch that, you've either got to try your luck with taxis or walk or wait until the morning trains and get in with the commuters. I'm a cheapskate and getting the metro was always easier and cheaper. 3. Moscow Metro is legendarily complicated and weirdly organized and intimidating. It's also very kind of creepy at 1 a.m. when, for a bustling metropolis outside the city center, there aren't many people hanging around in the station. Those big, grand Stalinist halls, totally devoid of anyone else. Bloody freaky. Like the setting of some weird dystopian futuristic zombie thing or something. Always gave me the heebie-jeebies. I should also add that for some strange reason, the men there seemed to think I was a member of the sex industry often. This was mainly a problem in the winter months because maybe the women don't risk the minus temperatures at 2 a.m. Just kidding. Maybe just because, I don't know, I spent most of the time dressed like Scott of the Antarctic and trying not to faceplant on black ice, none of which screams prostitute to most people, but... So onto the weirdo. I'd been out to the bars with my friends, and since I had planned a big sightseeing day the next day, I bailed on going to the clubs and headed home. I had a few friends who lived on the same line, but this night they were all going on a proper night out, so I thought, screw it, and braved a boring metro ride home alone. Going home started happily, merrily, drunkenly hopped onto a train, and it was quiet, but not too quiet. A couple of merrymakers out and about, but I got a seat with loads of space in a relatively quiet car, and I kind of zoned out for a few moments. Our antagonist got on at the next stop. He was a very big man, heavy set, but also generally huge, and he stood near the doors. I don't know why I just kind of ended up spacing out in his direction. I was drunk, alright, but I did end up staring a little bit, not paying attention, just waiting for my stop. Gradually, though, I noticed he had this pool of pinkish, reddish, watery stuff collecting in drips around his feet. Like, you know, the stuff you get in a packet of meat. My brain processed this as blood at first, so I stared like an idiot, wondering if this man was injured or something. When I looked up, I made embarrassing eye contact and realized two things. The liquid was leaking from his shitty, battered-looking backpack he was carrying. Seriously, who carries leaking meat in a backpack? And he was also staring at me. I looked away. He came to sit in the opposite seat from me, still staring. I only had to wait one stop for the station I had to change lines at, but it was the most damn uncomfortable wait I've had for a long time. He stared at me the whole time with something my brain can't decide was a weird rape or assault face or a want to hurt you face, since I was too scared to properly look at him. My station came. I got off the train. Meat Man followed, which I shrugged off. Maybe he lives at this stop, I said to myself. To be sure he wasn't following me because he made me massively uncomfortable, I took a very counterintuitive and convoluted path to the platform I needed to catch the last train from, even at the risk of missing it. Fortunately, this station was quite busy and full of guards for some reason, or I might have freaked out a bit here and then. I genuinely took the most stupid time-consuming trip of the platform I could think of. I looked over my shoulder a lot. I kid you not, he followed me every step of the way, step after leaking step. I tried everything to shake this man. When my train arrived, I got into one car, dived off, and ran into another, running like a lunatic to avoid missing it. He somehow followed me. I pretended to not get off at the next stop, the station before my station. He started to follow but didn't buy it. All I could think of is, wow, I'm going to be killed by the Russian equivalent of the Midnight Meat Train Man. This can't be happening. I purposely avoided even looking at him. I didn't want to miss my stop, so I jumped off the train like a crazy person. Again, luck was not on my side because that jerk must have the reflexes of a cat. My station was one of the ones that was genuinely really quiet, like a freaking tomb, and it creeped me out the best of times. To make it worse, the easiest way home was through one of those convoluted Moscow Metro overpasses. I decided to do the stupid thing and ignore this man, just go about my business and hope he went away. Halfway through the underpass, this man was still following me with his drippy bag and his crazed, unfocused eyes and his weird rape murder face. And Dutch courage kicked in. I was pretty spooked out by this man, but I was also really upset and angry. Suddenly, like really mad. What I did next was stupid, but it is a lighthearted end to the story of the scary Moscow Metro Man. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It probably won't work most of the time. I wouldn't try it on anyone or anything else. For example, bears. Yeah, so please don't try this on bears. I was also really drunk, which is probably why I thought screw it and decided to do it. Aware that this man was still following me and closing in and genuinely being very stalky now, I turned around and shouted, "If you don't leave me alone, I will murder you." and other things to that extent in a drunken mix of Russian and English. I kind of had a very special kind of alcohol and fear-fueled temper tantrum, which involved jumping and feeling like a crazy person, swearing and throwing my shoes at it. You know, out crazy the crazy. Eventually, I managed to get him to piss off enough to make a getaway, and put enough distance between us that I managed to lose him. Worth looking like an idiot for, I reckon. I don't know why he was following me or what was in that damn bag. That leaking stuff, or why he looked so mad. He might have been drunk, maybe, and I know my imagination takes me down a dark route when I think about it. Maybe I was lucky to not be found face down in a ditch or something. Maybe he had truly horrible plans, and I made it too much hassle to be worth the payoff. Maybe there was something properly nasty in that minky-looking backpack. I'll never know, and I don't want to. On the other hand, he was scared off by a drunken woman waving her arms like a helicopter, shouting threats and throwing her shoes around, so maybe he was just, I don't know, mildly creepy and not much of a threat at all. Again, I'll never know. But that's the story of the Moscow Meat Man. Hope it wasn't too long. I'd like to share with you a series of horrific events from my childhood that we never had a real resolution to. There were some suspects, but nobody was ever brought to justice. Also, there has been a lot of terrible things happen on my mom's property, and that's another story, but here's part of the beginning. This part of the story happened roughly around 1990 during my summer break from school, but continued on for quite some time. I must have been about 2nd or 3rd grade age, and I grew up with just my mom, because my dad was never in the picture, so we lived alone until I was about 12, when she remarried. Our secluded country neighborhood was safe for the most part, and all of our immediate neighbors were elderly, save for one couple who had a few young adult sons around my brother's age. For the most part, though, there wasn't much riffraff in the area. At first, there were only minor clues to indicate something was going on, such as things being moved in the backyard, and I guess because my mother was always being paranoid, and definitely a conspiracy theorist, she always had an idea that something was happening. I didn't really know this until I heard her talking about it much later after the events. She tried to hide things so they wouldn't scare me. She even started sleeping in my room with me at night, probably because she was paranoid, but I assumed it was because we could stay up late and watch movies together and eat snacks. One morning after I got up, I noticed that our old wooden back door had huge chunks missing out of it around the part where the lock/bolt goes into the door frame. It was as if somebody were trying to chip away at the locked part. I showed Mom what I had discovered, not realizing why the door was damaged, and she went completely silent, pale-faced and panicked. I could tell something was wrong, but I was too young to understand that somebody had apparently tried to break in, either in the night or when we were out. That day, she mended the door to the best of her ability, and if I remember correctly, she even put a new lock on it from the hardware store. She also filed a police report, but there was nothing they could do. I had a German Shepherd named Munchie. He was a big, spoiled baby who loved raiding the fridge with me, but to a stranger, he was probably very intimidating. He was also my best friend and very watchful over me, and I miss him to this day. For a week or two, after Mom and I would go to bed, Munchie would start pacing and whining and acting very anxious. Since we lived in such a rural place with no imminent danger, we thought, Mom would frequently let him outside by himself, so one night when he was acting exceptionally strange, she let him outside alone. We didn't have central air because our house was old, built in the 50s. We were very poor, and Kentucky summers weren't really too hot anyways. At night, Mom would open all the windows in the house, with the halfway burglar latch, of course. Since she was in my room with me watching a movie, we had both my bedroom windows all the way open. My back window overlooked a bit of a hill, which gradually sloped into a low, wide bottom. The bottom was full of tall weeds and bushes. Suddenly, we heard movement in the brush of the bottom. Munchie. Then we heard him snarling like a werewolf. Mom got up and ran to the window but couldn't see anything. What we heard next was horrifying. It sounded as if Munchie was attacking someone. He was making those awful noises as if he were eating somebody alive. I began to cry, terrified that something would happen to my best friend, and my mom started screaming in horror for Munchie to come home. We heard what sounded like somebody escaping my dog's wrath and taking off through the brush. Mom ran to the back door with me right behind her and called for Munchie at the top of her lungs, until he came running back into the house. He was panting and grunting and bristled up. I hugged him so tight, I probably nearly squeezed the life out of him. As time progressed, things got worse. Being so young, I didn't know for a long time, but my mom was safeguarding the house. She even moved a full tall dresser in front of my window that overlooked the hill in the bottom. She tried her best, but whoever was harassing us was finding new ways to make our life miserable, or maybe try to kill us. One night, she said that she heard peculiar noises coming from the backyard. I don't necessarily remember this, so I called her for details before writing this. Sounds were coming from under the dining room windows, which overlooked the backyard. She turned on the security light on the back of the house and saw a ladder propped up against the back of our house, as if somebody were trying to climb through our windows. This incident seemed more like an empty threat than a real attempt, especially considering the back door was probably easier access. We don't know if the person thought the windows would be unlocked or what, but for whatever reason, they gave it a try. Again, she called our local police and they did nothing. I should probably note that we didn't really have much law enforcement there. You probably wouldn't believe me if I tried to tell you how worthless law enforcement was, and still is in that area. On another occasion, and this memory is burned into my brain because it scared me so bad, somebody snuck up to my bedroom window one night. I hate to even think what their intentions might have been. Mom had drifted off to sleep, but I was quietly watching the rest of Willy Wonka. I was looking in the direction of my ominous window, the one overlooking the bottom, so I ended up getting a good look at this big white hand which reached up and slapped my window screen multiple times, in rapid succession. I screamed. Mom woke up and the tormentor took off, no doubt through the brushy bottom. My mom is a dog person. She adores dogs and always had lots of dogs and puppies around. We had 7 little black pups and the mother dog around this time, and they lived outside on our huge property, had plenty of space to play, and had a very nice big doghouse. At some point around the same time this stuff was happening, we had to be out of town for a few days. Mom had some people watching the house, and I guess she didn't really think anything horrendous could happen. Then again, she wasn't aware of how far this would go. When we came home, Mom's puppies had been killed and lined up in a row in the side yard, close to my window that overlooked the bottom. This was obviously absolutely devastating. The police did little to help, which included telling her how short to saw off her shotgun so that I was still legal and advising us to keep Munchie in the house. I forgot to ask, but I'm nearly positive that my mom ended up sending the mommy dog away to my sister's house on the other side of town. Months later, incidents were increasing in occurrence, and then somebody decided to take it way too far. Something hitting the back of the house in the wee hours of the morning. Mom looked out the windows and saw nothing, at least not until the next morning. She found a stick with a charred pine knot on it. Somebody had apparently lit it on fire and threw it at our house. I assumed they were hoping our house would burn. And don't even ask about the cops because they did nothing yet again. I wouldn't be surprised if they knew who the culprit was and just didn't care. Then one day, Munchie went missing. He had gone out to the bathroom in the evening before bed, but he didn't come back immediately like always. He vanished. I don't even want to go into detail about this because it breaks my heart all over again, but we found him days later. He had been poisoned. To be completely honest, I could keep going with this story. Although it takes a lot of unbelievable turns, not all of them are horrifying. Some are just ridiculous. Then around 2009, a multiple year-long court case began where my mom had to fight a group of her neighbors in court to keep them from stealing her property. Those events led to us believing that the people involved with that case may have had something to do with the torment we experienced all those years ago. But really all we can do is assume. So, tormentor, I wish we could meet, but you are a coward who harasses women and children and hurts animals. My cousin lived with me and my husband for about 3 or 4 months while she was looking for a new place, as she and her boyfriend recently split up. Tina was very helpful, and there would be a number of times that I'd come home from work and see that she's already making dinner for all of us, has cleaned the kitchen, or has ironed. She started seeing this guy called Mark, and I personally didn't like him and thought she could do better, but my husband convinced me into giving him a chance. Tina would text us and ask if it's okay if Mark could come over and stay, or if Mark could come to dinner, and I had to fight back the urge to say no, but I said our house is now her house, so she is welcome anytime. Each time I met him, I knew something wasn't right with him, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but I always had some creepy vibe. He always seemed to stare too much or would try and come up with weird topics to talk about over dinner. While I'm eating, I'd rather not talk about how much bleach it would take to kill someone. As I said, very weird things. Small items started going missing, and it was small things. Like some buttons came off my husband's jacket, so I got some new ones that matched the others the best I could and placed them on the side. I came home and they were nowhere to be seen, and the household said they didn't pick them up. My husband even joked around that the borrowers have it again. On payday, I decided to go and get some new clothes from a shop here, as I didn't want to spend that much. I usually grab some funny underwear, by the way, and by funny, I mean underwear with Family Guy or the Cookie Monster on them, and try and find some matching bras to go with it. I grabbed what I wanted, and putting everything away, I started dinner. A few weeks went by and I was just getting changed, and I opened my drawer and my Cookie Monster bra was there. I suddenly remembered that I have matching underwear and I'm laughing to myself, wondering what my husband will say when he finds out that I've got Cookie Monster underwear. I honestly couldn't find my stuff anywhere. I tipped my drawer out and went through it all, and I couldn't find them still. I obviously did buy them as I had the bras proof. I even looked in the bag in case I somehow left them in there. Feeling a bit let down and confused, I got dressed and carried on with my day. Fast forward a few more weeks, and my husband had my car for the day as he had a meeting a few hours away. I walked to work and I was on my way walking back from work when I heard a beep and a car pull up. Looking inside, I see Mark. "Hey, need a ride?" Yes please. Thank you very much." I get in the car and casually throw my work bag in the back seat and just turn around to say thank you again to Mark. And I said thankfully he showed up, as I didn't think I could handle walking back to work. Trying to make a joke of the situation. He drops me off at my house and I pull the seat forward and grab my bag while he gets out, as my cousin is at home. I'm grabbing my bag and some deodorant has fallen out and some cookies I was saving in my bag are now in the footwell. I reach my bag under and wait to grab my things when I grab a small plastic bag. Looking inside, I see my Cookie Monster underwear, the missing buttons, a photo of me and my husband, and a used toothbrush of mine that I had to replace, and even a small collection of my false nails I was wearing once. I ended up pulling them all off as I couldn't find the missing ones to replace the ones that had fallen off. Mark, why is my stuff in your car?" Right as I said that, I stepped slowly backwards from the car and reached for my phone to call my husband. Mark straight away jumps in his car and we haven't seen him since. I told my cousin about it and she said that he always used to go to the toilet for ages, and they joked all of the time about him having a water infection or that he didn't like her cooking. I walked into the bathroom at my community college and there was another guy in there and he was at one of the 2 urinals. I walk in and step up to the other urinal, and from the moment I walked in to the moment I unzipped my pants, this guy was staring directly at me. In my head I thought, maybe this guy's on the spectrum or something, because our college has a lot of students that are special needs and is a great place for them to get a degree and has really good programs to work with them. So it felt off, but I thought maybe it's nothing. I only wished that this was where the interaction ended. He finished before me and went over to wash his hands. I was just waiting for him to finish up and leave the bathroom because it felt really weird. While I'm still at the urinal and this guy is washing his hands, he looks at me and says, "You're a complete stranger, so you won't judge me. Is it wrong of me to take out my anger on people I don't know?" My first thought was, this guy isn't right, but I should probably listen. But I answered and said, "No, that's not right. That isn't healthy for you or the other person." He answers, "That's the conclusion I've come to as well. Thanks." And then he turns and walks out of the bathroom without even drying his hands. I don't know about that guy. I have a bad feeling about him and I don't know what to do about this situation. So, bathroom guy, I hope you get the help you need, but let's never meet again. Edit. From all the replies, it seems most people are just as confused as I was. Some say this guy could have been dangerous or unstable. That was kind of the vibe I initially had. Some say that this could have been a question that somebody with a mental illness would ask, not aware of social norms and with no ill intent. That could very well have been it too. Personally, I hope it was the latter, and I hope I don't see him on the news for doing something horrible one day. This encounter was not too long ago and solidified in my mind why I will always close the blinds at night and why even in a quiet suburban neighborhood, you should always lock your door. I've been reading creepy stories online since I was probably 12, when I first discovered Tumblr and Reddit, creepypasta, no sleep, and of course, let's not meet. So, I have long since taken to checking to all windows and locks before I go to bed, and closing blinds and curtains for fear that I might look out to see some creep in a clown costume with a knife in my garden, or a person with their head at an unnatural angle. I always sort of wished I had a creepy encounter so I could write about it, but if I never have another experience like this for the rest of my life, it will be too soon. So, context. This nice suburban neighborhood, as I say, is the home of my parents. A little town in Cheshire, England, a quiet street where we all knew each other. Low crime rate except for one house, which has been broken into and robbed twice in about 10 years. Both opportunistic. Once because the keys were near the door and the invader smashed a small pane to reach them and let themselves in. The other time, they left their blinds open overnight, leaving their laptops, wallets, and both car keys on full display. Anyways, I don't live with my parents anymore, but I was back in town and staying with them for a few days over summer. I was sitting in the kitchen, which faces onto the street, and working on my laptop, just glancing up occasionally to watch people pass by walking dogs or strolling with the pram. I'd seen something moving in my periphery, so, like every time, I looked up hoping to see a dog walker or one neighbor and her newborn grandson. Nope, two people. A man in a semi-casual suit and a woman in plain jeans and a blouse. But they were moving weirdly. The woman had her head craned over to one of her shoulders and her arm on that side was bent backwards and unnaturally upwards with her hand rhythmically flicking. Her other arm randomly but smoothly glided about, guided by her elbow. It was a bit like when you try and push two magnets together at the same point of polarity. That's how I would describe it. I have friends with epilepsy and I have never seen them contort or flick like that. Not even their myoclonic jerks. The man looked more like one of those dancing inflatables you see at a used car dealership. That's the only way I could describe his movements. They walked past my parents' house and I instinctively called to my cat to check he wasn't outside with those weirdos. Found him upstairs in my old room. He was looking out the window, and as I followed his gaze, I saw two of the kid neighbors in that house that had been robbed multiple times waving across to me. Well, to my cat, but I waved back. All the same, from their parents' upstairs bedroom window. I went downstairs to tell my parents about the strange moving people, and my dad just furrowed his brow, asked if they were gone, and said to double check that the door was locked. I headed back to the kitchen to check if our back door was locked. This door doesn't have any windows in it, so you can understand I jumped out of my skin when, as I put my hand on the door handle, it was pushed down by somebody on the other side. I pushed the door immediately, before anybody could push it from outside. I also must scream because I hear my dad call back. I hear his footsteps coming through the house and then I hear a loud gasp on the other side of the door and out of the kitchen window. Guess who I see making a threat? Creepy moving dude and dudette. By the time my dad made it through the house, they're gone. He doesn't seem to believe me, although he also doesn't seem to doubt either. He's never seen them before and takes a free pop at me for being discriminatory against potential house guests with movement disorders. We make jokes like this because I had a movement disorder as a kid, and one time a parent wouldn't let me into her son's birthday party because they would be playing Simon Says and I made it difficult for the other kids. I digress. Anyways, these people were gone. I don't sleep well, due to that movement disorder actually. And those scary stories I read meant that I always listened to the excessive creaking in this house and noises on the street outdoors at night, like people walking home drunk and foxes mating. Most of the sounds are quiet though, so imagine my shock when my straining ears are suddenly attacked by a child's scream. It takes me a second to locate the sound and another to lurch from my bed to the window, looking straight over to the upstairs window, the same one where not 12 hours ago my neighbor's children were waving to me from. I scanned down the house and saw their front door wide open. I shouted for my parents, hoping to wake them up as I flew down the stairs in my PJs, with 999 already dialed on my phone to report this likely home invasion before I do anything else. I'm remembering to scream fire, not burglar, as I stride across the road, attempting to wake up other neighbors and gather support. There are two kids and a teenager in that commonly broken into house, kids who I babysat for 10 years, and one of them just screamed at 2 a.m. when their front door was wide open. I make sure I say this out loud to the emergency responder on the phone. As I near the door, I can see a figure inside moving frantically. So after telling the phone responder what is happening and answering their brief questions, I shout into the door from a safe distance, some phrases the police gave me to say. The police are on their way. We are right outside and we're getting help. Is anybody hurt? And to tell the intruders, we know you are there. Please do not hurt anyone. The police can help you. I get a response from the upstairs window and step back into the road to see a mother holding all 3 kids in her arms, and she tells me the middle child, who's 9, found intruders on the stairs when she went to get a drink in the night. The girl, Imogen, tells me they're like clowns. Clowns. This extra detail is the straw that broke the camel's back, and my vision darkens. Shit, I'm going to pass out. The last thing I hear is Emmy telling her mom I said a bad word. I came to in the middle of the road with a foil blanket on and a soft Octonauts toy under my head. I could see lots of blue lights, 3 police cars and an ambulance. That's one for me, and I can see my neighbors out of the corner of my eye. My hearing returns as Emmy tells me her little brother volunteered his toy because I hit my head when I fainted. Suddenly, I'm up and looking around to count all 5 of the family members and checking for injury. Over the top of their heads, I can see an arm frantically waving in and out of view. Yep, moving weirdos broke into my neighbor's house. I see the woman is standing still, her head still slumped to the side, just as she's been lowered into a police car. I was later told that as I spoke to my neighbors out their bedroom window, their dad had gone to fight the intruders and kicked the woman down the stairs as she was climbing them. The man was the frantically moving shadow I had seen from the doorway. Police reckon that they had been trying doors down our street and found one unlocked. I told them about the couple trying our door earlier in the afternoon. I'm guided to the ambulance and sit on the bed while the paramedics tend to a large cut on the back of my head from my fall. I vaguely feel them removing gravel, cleaning, gluing, and dressing it, but I'm preoccupied watching 2 police try to contain the human dancing inflatable man. They can't catch both arms at the same time to cuff him, so eventually, one policeman is cuffed to one of the man's hands and thus has his arm flung every which way as the man continues to move. I have no idea what they've been tried with, if they were on drugs or had a movement disorder. My dad and I do have a small bet on this matter, or when the court hearing is yet, but as a key witness, I'll be told when they need me in court. But I would happily go the rest of my life without hearing a kid scream at 2 a.m. and seeing those 2 weird moving creeps. So, creepy dancing dude and dudette, that's not me. When I was in grade school, my family lived in a house that sat directly across from the school I attended. However, there was about a half a mile of wooded area between them. I was allowed to walk to and from school because it was so straightforward. My mom informed me that she and her siblings walked through the woods to school when they were younger, so it felt like a natural and safe thing for her. I loved the excitement of being able to walk to school all on my own, and I felt pretty at home in the woods, as I had been raised around them. The walk was pretty direct, with very few issues aside from a small but wide creek that I had to cross. The creek itself was no problem. It was the fact that on each side there was a steep bank that had to be scaled. It wasn't too terrible unless it had been raining. It had rained the day before, so my steps, which were normally loud, were fairly silent. This might have saved my life. It at least saved me from something terrible. When I reached the creek, I was in my own little world. I was thinking about a science project that we had to do at school and whether or not I was fully prepared for my part in it. I was doing the supernova section and wasn't feeling very ready to make a speech in front of everyone, explaining it. Anyways, I reached the creek and dropped down the first bank with a slightly wet thud. I crossed over the water and began looking for something to grab a hold of, to pull myself up with. There were usually roots sticking out to use. Before I could climb up the other side, I heard a noise, like people talking. I stopped and waited to see if I heard it again, and I did. I heard a couple of boys talking, getting closer to me. I smashed myself up against the bank and listened for a minute. I don't know why, but something just told me to stay away, that something was wrong. The boys came so close, all the way to the edge of the creek bank, but they didn't jump down. If they had, they would have seen me in a flash. As luck would have it, there was an overhang that I was able to hide under. I listened as the boys talked. Yeah, she comes through here all the time. Should be coming around in just a minute. My heart sank. I was the only person that walked this trail to and from school, and they were in my direct path. That isn't to say that no one else was ever in the woods, but in all the time that I used this trail, I had never seen another person. To get to the woods from my house, I had to cross the road and walk through a small flat area with no trees, and from the school side, I had to walk through the school's football field. Anybody from either side could have seen me going in or out of the woods easily. I stood plastered to the wall of mud, waiting for them to catch me, but they walked around a little bit, smoked a few cigarettes, and started getting frustrated. Where the heck is she, man? She said she would be here, so where is she? Maybe she didn't go to school today. Anyways, we gotta go or we're gonna miss our bus. The high schoolers caught their bus to the high school to elementary school. This told me two things. One, they were obviously in high school, so much older than me. And two, they had some seriously bad intentions toward me. I heard them leaving, but I didn't dare move. I waited a good 30 minutes or so before I darted out of the creek bed and toward home. I'll never know exactly what those boys had planned to do to me that day, and I'm not sure I want to. In December 2018, my ex and I split up after 7 years in a relationship. I was new to the dating game, so I didn't want to jump into it. In February, I met a guy at the bar that we frequent. The second time I met him, we exchanged numbers. By the end of March, I was feeling pretty comfortable and invited him to a party at my house. He stayed after the party, and one thing led to another. Well, after it was all said and done, I had a weird vibe. He was too pushy, and it made me uncomfortable. So I asked him to leave. I planned to never speak to him again, that is, until he started to text me from random numbers. He would say things like, "Hope you have fun fishing," when I didn't post on any social media that I was fishing. "I hope the movie was good," when I hadn't posted anything online that I was at the movies. He would text me and ask where in the bar I was at different bars, when I had never told anyone or posted where we were going. We had no mutual friends, so he was following me. The final straw was when my friends took me to Washington, D.C. for my 25th birthday celebration. We bar hopped all over the city. Around 2:30 a.m., we came out of the last bar we were at and decided to get cookies across the street. As we were coming out of the cookie shop, guess who pops up? You guessed it. He does. He goes, "I hope such and such were fun. I wanted to say hi earlier, but since you haven't been replying to my messages, I didn't want to freak you out." Yeah, safe to say I was terrified now. My friend's husband thankfully stepped in and called him out and threatened to call the police. I changed my number and moved. Thankfully, I haven't heard from him since, so to the guy I mistakenly had my first ever one-night stand with, let's never meet again. Update. After all the comments saying that I should still contact the police, that he could still be stalking me, I decided that it was best to do that. I contacted my local police, and they advised me to contact the police where I lived previously. I did so, and I still live close enough that I went on Tuesday to file the paperwork for a restraining order. Thankfully, I know his full name and place of employment, so they will be able to locate him. I provided all the text messages and screenshots that I have, and now we wait for him to be served. It will be a temporary 15-day restraining order. It will be extended because our local courthouse docket is on a stacked schedule due to the virus, so once we've been given a court date, we will go. I was told by the sheriff that it shouldn't be an issue getting a judge to approve a restraining order for 2 years, with all the evidence that I have and the testimony from my friends who witnessed these events. Thank you for the advice. This happened to me a few years ago while I was still in college, but I've been watching a ton of those narrated true stories on YouTube, and I felt compelled to share my own experience. For some context, I'm Irish, and I was studying in the UK to get my bachelor's degree. I don't know how common this is elsewhere, but where I lived, it seemed to be more common enough that landlords renting to students privately would convert the front downstairs room into an extra bedroom. This is where my bedroom was for my first year. I didn't mind it too much, but it was a bit weird having the front door directly in my room. Especially since, for those who aren't familiar with terraced houses in the UK, there isn't a front garden usually, and we just had a small section separating the front door from the path outside. By now, I'd been living here for a few months, and I could recognize the difference in the sound of somebody walking past on the path and the sound of someone stepping towards the front door. On the night that this happened, I was totally alone in the house, as both my housemates were away from home for the weekend. This was a little bit unusual since neither of them usually went home except for special occasions, but I think it might have been Valentine's Day around that time or something similar. It was around 1 in the morning and I was lying in bed and on the phone with my boyfriend at the time as we were long distance. As we were talking, I could hear some footsteps outside and I immediately recognized that it was somebody right outside the door. I kept listening and I could hear them shuffling around a bit, and then they started fumbling with the door handle. That spooked me and I told my boyfriend that I was going to have a look out the window to see if I could spot whoever it was. I got up and part the curtains and quite literally pressed my face and hands against the window to get a look outside, since it was pitch black by now and the street lights had been turned off. It took a second then for me to realize what I was looking at, but whoever it was who was outside was doing the same exact thing I was, pressed up against the window and staring in at me inches away. I didn't scream. I just felt as if all the wind had been knocked out of me, as I remember feeling like somebody had just dunked me into a pool of ice water. Whoever it was looked to be male. Couldn't see his face properly, but I just remember he was wearing a hoodie. He ran when he saw me, and after trying to collect myself, I quickly told my boyfriend and then rang the police. I don't remember how long it took for them to get there, but there wasn't a whole lot they could do. I think they might have done a quick patrol of the area, but nothing ever came of it. It was absolutely one of the most terrifying things that's happened to me, and I can't figure out at all why he was trying to break in. At the time I had my light on, which would have been visible from the window even with the curtains drawn, so I figured I could rule out that he was a junkie or squatter looking for a place to crash. I don't know if maybe he'd been watching me and my housemates for a while, but seeing 3 girls living alone and thought maybe this would make an easy burglary, or worse. But I am thankful I didn't have any trouble again afterwards. I couldn't sleep for days after, and I remember staying up until early morning, just watching movies on my laptop to feel less alone until I eventually fell asleep from exhaustion, once it started to get light outside. Since I was here from Ireland, I didn't even have any family members close by who I could call for or go and stay with, and it was the most agonizingly long weekend of my life waiting for my housemates to come back. I definitely think I've developed a slight phobia now of looking out the window while it's still dark outside. Now, before you bite my head off, yes, I know I have posted this story before. My reason for reposting is that the story has since been archived, and I have sort of a massive update to it that I really wanted to add. This morning, I was going through a really old hard drive and discovered a folder. The folder was named Kearney. In it was proof to validate parts of the story. So then people can hopefully stop accusing me of having made it up. I apologize for the awful quality of the pictures because these were taken back in 2007 with my video camera stills feature. So, hi everyone. Lately, I've had some requests to finally share the whole story of the homeless man I accidentally took in as a tenant and the incidents that followed. I'm just saying in advance, this is kind of a long one, but every detail is relevant. And please note, although everything I have documented is factual, the case was never solved and has likely gone cold since this happened more than 10 years ago. Now, back in 2007, I found myself working as a bartender at a now closed pub in my hometown. Not a job I particularly liked, but it did pay the bills. At this time, they had hired a new kitchen manager that we simply knew as Kearney. He was a pleasant enough man, mostly keeping to himself, but always stayed late to help the barman do our closing duties, so we all liked him for that. New in town, Kearney had yet to find a place of permanent residence, and I had recently lost my tenants, so somebody suggested that he ask me. He was considerably older than the tenants I usually took in, but having had a streak of bad luck with tenants my own age, I thought an older man with a nice steady job may be a shift in the right direction, so I agreed. Kearney wasted no time and followed me home that very same night, but only he wasn't alone. Enter Lawrence, the boyfriend of Kearney. Honestly, I hadn't even realized he was gay to that point, but it was water off my back regardless. Looking back now, what really should have bothered me though was Lawrence's appearance. He looked like he had been sleeping on the street, rather appropriately as I would later find out. So Kearney moved in and Lawrence was there a lot too, and it was easy to know when, due to his mobile ringtone sounding like the quacking of a duckling. Kearney had some habits that were rather noteworthy to this story. In particular, one, he basically never closed his bedroom door. No matter what he was doing in there, it was always open. And two, although he was a very heavy smoker, he never once smoked inside the house. So Kearney had been living there for about 2 weeks when I had come down with an awful case of pink eye. This being highly contagious, I was given leave of absence from my bartending job and therefore decided to go wait it out at my sister's for a few days. Apparently, I didn't mind giving it to her. Sorry, sis. So, the day my sister was scheduled to come pick me up, no, I couldn't drive yet. I took a casual stroll into the bar that Ben, my good friend from high school and, at the time, coworker, and I had been building into my house, and something caught my eye. All of our liquor bottles were completely empty. Now, those who had been frequenting my house at that time would know that we weren't just talking about 1 or 2 bottles of brandy here and there, but bottles of whiskey, gin, vodka, all kinds of stuff. Basically, it was a fully stocked bar that could host a pretty big party without requiring much in the way of additions. So I called Kearney in and asked him what he knew about this, receiving feedback that Lawrence and he had been on a slight drinking binge. Those were the actual words that he used, and it left me both furious about the thousands of worth of stock they had drunk out, but also slightly impressed that he was actually still alive. Regardless, I said that I would be dealing with this upon my return. So I'm with my sister for a few days, and on Friday I get a call from my local police department asking me if I know a Conrad Schultz. Ironically enough, I didn't. They finally add that I will probably know him as Kearney and that I should probably come down to the station, as they had just arrested his boyfriend trying to sell my camera equipment. So my sister rushes me back home, where all of my camera equipment was on display at the police station. It's on this visit that I'm informed that Lawrence was actually a Navy SEAL who got dishonorably discharged before turning to a life of crime and now has a rap sheet longer than the length of a chapter book. The kicker was that both he and Kearney were actually homeless men who had met at the Salvation Army. So Lawrence is in jail and my sister drops me off at home, more or less the same time that Kearney gets home as well. Based on Kearney's account of what happened, he had turned Lawrence in himself, so he couldn't allow Lawrence to do to me what he was trying to do, I guess. Although I had appreciated his sacrifice, I still told Kearney that he would have to go, having been the overall cause of all of this. However, not wanting to leave the homeless man, while homeless, I gave him until the end of the month to make other arrangements. So Monday comes, and having just completed a staff meeting, I walk home to encounter a very much free Lawrence, sitting on the sidewalk across from my house, watching it. I confront Lawrence as to why he's there, and he tries to apologize before begging for money. Rather out of character, really. I dismiss him without giving him a cent. Now, I go back to the previous night. See, I had mentioned the staff meeting for a reason, as it was at that meeting where we had gotten a rather sizable list of liquor bottles that had gone missing from the storeroom, leaving us all suspecting each other. I, however, would not have to wait long to figure out who the real culprit was, as a few days later I opened the garage bin in my kitchen to see the missing bottles, all empty and staring back at me. I decided to sit on this information for the time being, although I did photograph it, just in case I needed it as evidence later. I had also called over Ben to inform him of the developments. As this was quickly becoming a detective game, we decided to enter Kearney's room to search for further evidence. Nothing of vast significance in there, with one exception: 2 single photographs of Lawrence. Before he had turned into a homeless version of Lex Luthor or Charles Xavier. Actually, there were several of Lawrence's things still there, but as Lawrence had spent a lot of time there before the incident, I accepted this as normal. Now, I should also add that I had mentioned Lawrence's release to Kearney and had told him that if I even suspected that they were still seeing each other, I would throw him out of the house myself. Only a few days would pass before this came into play. On this particular night, I had been bartending again, and Kearney had constantly been stopping by the bar to help himself to drunk glasses half full of wine, and half full of Coke, which he would go drink outside the restaurant. We confronted him about this, but as he correctly pointed out, he was still a manager, and we had no right to tell him what he could or could not do. On his 4th trip, however, I had grown suspicious and decided to follow him outside, where I encountered Lawrence sitting outside, sharing the half Coke / half wine concoctions with Kearney. This made me mad, so the next day I returned to the restaurant with my photographic evidence, which I handed over to the general manager, who was also kind of a friend of mine. Although I hadn't physically seen it, I had heard the confrontation through the office door when he fired Kearney. Kearney left, obviously upset, and apparently had no idea that I had been the one who had turned him in. So we had closed early that night and I was walking home, going past the high school. I saw Kearney coming from the opposite direction. He walked past me, literally only saying 2 words. "I'm scared." Before disappearing into the darkness, that would be the last time that I would ever physically lay my eyes on Conrad Schultz. So we reached the final week before Kearney's eviction was to take place. Ben had come to stay with me for that duration as we both wanted to monitor the situation and make sure that nothing else happened. It was in this week that Kearney's behavior suddenly changed. He was constantly smoking in his room and his door was closed 24/7. In fact, neither Ben nor I had caught so much as a glimpse of him in that entire last week, which we hadn't thought much of at that time. So, the day of Kearney's eviction comes around. Ben has gone home for a few hours and I finally hear Kearney's bedroom door open. Somebody walks out of the room, opens the front door and leaves. Followed him outside, but somehow he had already completely disappeared. What was left though was his house keys, indicating that he obviously wasn't planning to come back. I took a look at the keys, noticing something strange. Although the correct keys were all in the keychain, there were also several that weren't mine. Why would he leave me the wrong keys? I remember thinking as I walked into his room. His room was a shock, not because of the state it was in. The two had broken his bed in an act of wild monkey sex, but I had known about that already. As I said, he never closed his damn door, but more that he had literally left almost all of his belongings behind with one exception. You guessed it. The two photos of Lawrence. Upon further investigation, I suddenly realized that all traces of Lawrence ever being there had completely vanished, with all of Kearney's stuff left behind. There was one thing Lawrence left behind though, his duckling ringtone, which it turned out hadn't been so much a ringtone as an actual duckling, which now strolled around casually in the vacant bedroom, and we named him Neville by the way. So Ben returns and gets updated about the developments, both of us thinking the way he left was rather weird. Of course, the whole thing had been weird. It was only when I asked the infamous question that all of this became a conspiracy theory. Did you ever actually see Kearney in this last week? It was to our shock that we realized that neither of us had. Suddenly putting puzzle pieces together. The changing habits, Neville the duck, the wrong keys, only Lawrence's stuff being gone. It was to great discomfort that we both asked the question, who had really been living in our house this last week? During the next few days, Ben and I went on a mission, searching the town, crawling into drain pipes, trying to find any trace of Kearney's whereabouts, but they all added up to nothing. Conrad Schultz had simply vanished off the face of the earth. That wasn't the case with Lawrence though. No, he was still around, having made some new homeless friends. We encountered him several times begging on the streets. I asked him every time, "Where's Kearney, Lawrence?" But he just acted like he had never heard of him. The last time I would see Lawrence was across from work, attempting to break into a car. I had called the police on him and they had arrived rather quickly, arresting him on the spot. While he was being led away by the police, I shouted after him one last time, "Where is Kearney, Lawrence?" But he just ignored me and let the cops drag him away. The next day, I filed a police report, reporting Kearney as a missing person and suggesting that Lawrence may know something about it, but nothing ever came of it. So, Lawrence, I don't know if you did something to Kearney or not, but if you did, let's not meet again. Hey Reddit, I'm a long-time user, but due to the nature of this situation, I decided to use a throwaway. Trigger warning for baby death, abuse, stalking, etc. Also, apologies if this isn't the right sub, we just need answers. My girlfriend's mother is a long-time heroin user and has been in and out of jail for my girlfriend's whole life. When she lived with her mother and her mother's husband, she witnessed physical abuse and drug activity. She was forced to move out at a very young age in order to stay alive. She thought her mother was finally clean when her mom announced her pregnancy. After getting over the initial shock, my girlfriend then decided to be supportive of her mom since she thought she was clean. That was until her mom overdosed while pregnant. She decided to cut all contact at that point. My girlfriend is also a mandated reporter and last year reported her mom and her mom's husband to the state since she knew it wasn't a safe situation for the baby. The baby died in their house not even a month after due to an overdose with signs of physical abuse. My girlfriend's mother was arrested for the murder of her baby and other charges. Her husband was arrested for child endangerment and other charges very recently. At first, the judge did not grant either of them bail. Eventually, her husband was granted bail, which he posted. We did not know this until recently, which helped us put some of the pieces together. My girlfriend and I like to sit outside of her house in the car and just chat or listen to music. Recently, there have been black cars around my girlfriend's house. She is also frequently being followed by black cars when she drives me home. It's the same couple of black cars that do this. They're not just random ones. At first, we thought we were just paranoid since everybody was still in jail, but when we found out that the husband was out of jail, we began to doubt our insanity. The first major thing happened after my girlfriend and I went on a dinner date. Got home after dark and sat in her car for about 45 minutes before we noticed the same black car passing by us every few minutes. After 10 minutes of that, a different car drove towards us, flicking its high beams on when it got close enough for us to see who was inside. It swerved into the oncoming lane, and I genuinely thought I was going to hit the passenger side of the car. It sped away, and we ran inside. After that, we started noticing the black cars more and more. This past Wednesday morning, around 3 a.m.-ish, the same distinct black van that we had been seeing pulled up outside my house. This was weird because my girlfriend and I live about 30 minutes from each other in two separate cities. A man got out of the van and shined a flashlight through my yard, scanning it almost entirely. He shined the flashlight up at the window I was sitting at, kept it there for a second, then walked 30 feet to an empty driveway, scanning around there for 20 seconds before getting in the van and peeling away. The windows were ice covered and frozen, so I couldn't make out the specifics of the van, but it was strange. A few nights later, my girlfriend and I spent some time hanging out in the car when we spotted a black van hiding behind another parked car further up the street. We could only see one headlight, but it creeped by us as we sat in the car. My girlfriend lives between two dead-end streets. Think of a very blocky U, and she lives in the middle of that. The van went up the first dead end, four-way on, and sat for a few minutes before turning around and driving almost into another lane of traffic to get close to us. It then went up the other dead end and stayed put. We thought it was weird that the van didn't just back out of the first dead end, instead opting to drive all the way up the narrow street and turn around. After a few minutes, we call a friend and recount this story just to get an extra opinion. While my girlfriend was talking to our friend, I got out of the car to go for a cigarette and to see how far away the van was. I walked up the dead end that the van was on for about 15 feet before getting the worst gut feeling I've ever gotten. Across the street from me was a black mass, which was darker than the darkness around it. I decided to just turn around and rush my girlfriend into the house. Later that night, we heard a bang coming from downstairs, followed by what sounded like a boot on wooden stairs. We locked the bedroom door, and I sat against the door with a baseball bat, hoping to barricade it. A few minutes later, we heard a car door slam before the sound of tires squeezing and a car driving away. Our initial idea was maybe it came from the TV, but we had paused it, and the TV in the next room is never loud enough to feel real. When I went downstairs an hour later to get water, there was nothing damaged or missing. We theorized that maybe it was the sound of the front door trying to be opened, even though it was dead bolted. My girlfriend's exterior wall doesn't face the road, and we've never heard car sounds before. It is, however, next to a private driveway, and sometimes we'll hear her grandparents' car door close, or the neighbors backing out. The next day, I was shoveling the sidewalks at my girlfriend's house, an activity that took about 20 minutes, and I saw the same black Chevy Silverado with mud streaks on the tailgate. It circled the block about 4 times. I was able to see the silhouette of the man driving through the passenger side window, and each time it was the same man and same truck. My girlfriend lives in a small town, and we were able to catalog the neighborhood cars. The black van and truck are abnormal. Our theory is that somebody is trying to scare my girlfriend into not testifying, or flat out making sure neither of us have the ability to testify. We really just need some more opinions. Are we just paranoid, or is this something we should actually be worried about? Do you think these are just weird coincidences? I had to think about it, but I believe this happened in the 6th grade. It's hard for me to believe that this took place 20 years ago. One thing I don't remember is what our science project was exactly. All I know is that I got partnered up with this kid in my class named Brian. He seems like a chill kid at school. He was chubby, quiet, and kind of shy even. When I went to his house to work on our project for the first time, he was apparently much more comfortable and seemed to be very outgoing. He made jokes and laughed a lot more than usual. kept saying stuff to his mom in Spanish, and then they would both laugh at me. But I never thought it was really that mean, and I would laugh along, even though I didn't know what they were saying. Usually right afterwards, he would tell me what they had supposedly said. At one point, we were in his room, and he asked me to go ask his mom for a line of paper. I told him I didn't speak Spanish and he should go ask her, but he said he would just tell me how to say it. I don't remember exactly, but he told me to say something like it. So I went and asked his mom. I knew something was off right away just by the way she looked at me, like I had said something crazy. She grabbed my hand and walked me to the bathroom like I was a special little boy. Once we were in the bathroom, she pointed at the toilet paper with that confused look still on her face as if to say, "Where the heck else would it be?" I was confused and could only speak to her in English while she spoke to me in Spanish, and we didn't understand each other. Soon we heard Brian having a hilarious laughing fit from the other room. Laughing so hard like he thought it was the funniest thing ever, but I was pretty sure it was only kind of funny. I wasn't worried though, and I laughed it off. Haha, you got me. Eventually, he became really excited to show me something. He told me he'd be right back, and then he ran out of his room. He was gone for a minute or so and then returned, telling me to follow him. He was so sure that I was going to love whatever he was about to show me, so I was excited too. Couldn't wait. We get outside and he goes to this little shed and pulls out a lawnmower. He tells me to follow him. He started the mower, began walking, and then gestured with his hand again for me to follow him. As we walked, we rounded a corner and there on the ground was a net full of frogs. There were maybe 20 or more frogs in there. I didn't have time to stop him. Right before it happened, we looked at each other. Him looking at me to make sure I was looking, and me looking at him in pure confusion. He pulled back on the mower, raising the blades, and then let the weight of the spinning blades fall down on the writhing pile of frogs. The mower bogged down just for a split second, and there was a sickening wet crunching sound, followed by chunks being spit everywhere as he raised the blades back up. He raised the blades and let them fall on the pile of frogs 4 or 5 times. All the while he was staring at my face and laughing maniacally at my horrified reaction. He released the bar and the mower went silent as he crumpled to the ground and began rolling around on the grass laughing. A couple of frogs escaped without getting blended. A few more frantically scattered away from the mower, missing limbs. I awkwardly laughed with him and played along like nothing bad had just happened. I never get disgusted to the point of throwing up, and it's hard to disgust me at all. But from that point I definitely knew there was something wrong with Brian. And until now, I've never told anyone. I wouldn't say that I was afraid. It was just that I didn't think it was a good idea to tell anybody what had happened. Not his mom and not my friends. Not my parents, not my brother or sister or best friend. I didn't tell anyone anything about it, and Brian never did anything like that again or mentioned it. It was the weirdest thing. They say it's the quiet ones you've got to watch out for. I haven't seen him since 6th grade ended, but sometimes I wonder just what kind of person he turned out to be. I've never been a girl who has scared easily. I routinely watch crime shows, horror movies, and stuff. However, a night in March 2005 changed all of that for me. I was attending college for music in 2005 and had recently seen one of my favorite violinists. Inspired, I had asked a pianist friend to accompany me while I played a piece. Looking back, it wasn't smart on our part to go at night to the college's music practice rooms, which are nearly soundproof and separated from the rest of the building. I figured since it was across the street from the campus police headquarters, we would probably be okay. Was I ever wrong? My friend and I are in the practice room for about 15 minutes when she looks at me and says, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy with a mask behind you." Now, this is college. There are plenty of stupid people doing stupid stuff all of the time. When I turned around, I realized this was something much more sinister. There, crouched on the other side of the practice room's glass door, is a thin guy about 5'7", maybe 5'8", wearing a thin blonde curly wig. The Groucho Marx glasses / nose combo thing, a hideous shirt, just a personal judgment, and the creepiest smile ever. That's right, no pants or underwear, just his small penis out. When I turn around, he waves and enters this tiny practice room. My friend and I try to remain calm because we honestly don't know what to do. Then this guy tries to strike up small talk with us and mentions he heard me talking about my favorite violinist. Apparently, he's been standing outside the practice room the entire time. He knows our names, where I had gone that day, where our hometown is, my guy problems at the time, etc. As soon as possible, my friends and I booked it out of there. He was blocking the door most of the time, so we were really scared. As we are leaving, he says, "Let's do it again," with my name. Of course, we go to the campus police department immediately, and they think it's all pretty funny. The next day, I'm sitting in choir when the dean comes in and says, "Hey, a friend of your cousin stopped by today. He said he wanted to give you some CDs of my favorite violinist. He asked for the girl who played violin with your first name, so I assumed it was you." I tell him what happened, and he's furious because the campus security didn't do anything. That's when the stalking began. He soon was clever enough not to go by the music office again, but my dorm neighbors would tell me a guy was looking for me to give me some kind of gift. One time, a stack of CDs from various violinists was sitting in my assigned seat for choir. Another time, they were outside my door. All the while, the campus security is doing nothing. Some people even suggested that I should enjoy the attention. Things died down when I finally moved off campus and stopped altogether, when I moved away from the college town. Until 2 years ago when I moved back to the same town. The first week back, I received a direct message on Twitter saying, "Glad you're back. I've missed you. Let's get together and listen to." Insert violinist name here. I reported it to the police, who haven't caught the person to my knowledge. All they knew is the address came from somewhere other than my city. Part of me is still waiting for the knock on the door, or a present left at my work or home. In Pennsylvania, right near the border into Delaware, there was a narrow, eerie place with deformed trees, closed-off paths, and lots of legends. It is formally known as Devil's Road, the main attraction in a place called Satansville, which encompasses the whole of dark twists, isolated roads, and unsettling encounters. It was written about in the book Weird Pennsylvania, which highlights the creepy places of the state. According to many rumors, there is a cult house hidden in the woods surrounding the road, and any trespassers on the road, especially those who stop, will be chased out with a black or white SUV or truck. For years, I had read about the place and heard spine-chilling stories until I couldn't stop thinking about seeing it for myself. My friend Matt and I spent almost every Friday night at the mall together, as teenagers do. As expected, it can get pretty boring pretty fast, especially with no money to actually have a motive to shop around for anything other than disappointment. Visiting Satansville without telling our parents became another weekly tradition of sorts after he told me about his experience a month before our first visit. He had told me that when he visited with his guy friends, his phone service completely cut out, leaving them without Google Maps in a potentially dangerous, unclear area that was already scarcely mapped. Soon after, he told me, a black truck came off of a dirt road and followed closely behind them until they found the main road. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to be hooked. Not too much happened on our first few trips. We would see other cars rarely, as it's a hidden road that is no longer marked due to excessive theft of the street sign. Occasionally, the cars would be black in color, and we would get a rush of adrenaline. It was fun, but not exactly terrifying, until one night. We finished up at the mall around 6, and we left with enough time to circle around once or twice in daylight, and the remainder of the time in the dark. It was about a 40-minute drive to Satansville from the mall, and I was tingling with excitement. According to the legends, cars that visit frequently are more likely to have experiences at this place, and this would be our third time visiting in the last few weeks. Instead of Matt and I going alone this time, we brought our friend Lola, who was very outgoing and would likely have a sense of humor in a situation that we'd be too scared to continue in normally. We drove down the highway and finally made the first turn, leading to the seclusion. Matt and I had pinpointed several areas where we thought the cult house may be, but stopping on the road is illegal, so we never had a real chance to explore. At least, that's the logical reason I give in lieu of us being major cowards. The ambience immediately changed as we entered Satansville, and the cool night air flooded through the cracked windows. In the first few turns, other people aren't entirely a rare sight. A few trucks pulling out of driveways they like. However, the turn onto Devil's Road never loses its wow factor. The trees on both sides of the narrow road lean away from the forest aggressively, not just a tilt, but completely bending in the trunk away from things we could only imagine. We were approaching the first major bend in the road, and a car was coming up towards us. It was a tight squeeze, nearly impossible for two opposing vehicles to pass. The presence of a car alone was enough to cause a twinge in my gut. Matt was focused on squeezing by while turning, and Lola was too busy cracking jokes to see what I saw, but I have never forgotten the face since then. I looked over to the white Jeep to my left, and the window was incredibly tinted but half down, looking back at me straight into my eyes like he had been looking at me long before I looked to him. He was a young man, maybe 25, with long blonde hair, a deathly pale face, and horribly thin fingers on the steering wheel. He was not at all focused on driving, as his eyes pierced me, and this is the worst part. His neck was turned completely towards me, while the rest of his body was completely straight forward. This may not sound creepy, but it was not normal to bend that way. He said something, but I couldn't hear him over Lola and Matt, laughing at our antics. I couldn't break his gaze. I was stuck staring at him until finally Matt passed the bend and he was gone. I kept checking the rearview windows, terrified with a feeling I'd never quite felt before. When I could no longer see the Jeep, though it felt as though he could still see me, I quietly asked my friends if they'd seen him. Neither of them had looked at him nor felt anything unusual. I was pretty unsettled, yet excited to see what else would happen. We turned off Devil's Road, but were still in Satansville, preparing to loop back around, when we passed a little shack that always housed two black trucks. There was no sign of any other drivers, and we wanted to stir the pot a little bit. We stopped for a few moments and honked the horn and flashed our blinkers, and then kept driving. We also blasted Old Town Road for some reason, because that was our peak of comedy at the time. We looped back around, and were back on Devil's Road when Matt stopped mid-sentence to adjust his mirror. In the darkening distance was a black truck. We giggled with nervous excitement and kept driving. It was exciting, but it kept a reasonable distance, and I think we all kind of assumed it was a coincidence. That is, until we turned off Devil's Road once more and saw that there were no trucks parked by the shack anymore. We lost the truck when we turned on the main road to circle back around again. We circled around 2 more times, nervous but skeptical, and not much happened other than an ass-riding white SUV that kept blinking its headlights. Not going to lie, that freaked us out. And the return of one truck to the shack. This is where it gets really intense. On our 5th loop, we were all very tense. The aura had changed to heavy, and it was completely dark at this point. Things had started to feel more ominous. Probably from the slightly less passive actions taken towards us by whoever was there. We went down the bends, peering nervously into the woods. Some trees were marked with 666 and upside-down crosses. Marks of other, more ballsy teenagers, and there was a distant light in the woods. Courtesy of who knows what. As we turned off Devil's Road, but still in the heart of Satansville, headlights appeared behind us. It was impossible to tell what kind of car it was, as it was pitch black and we had just turned the first major bend. Moments later, the truck appeared behind us, speeding. We were going about 25 probably, and the truck must have floored it to catch up, and it drove uncomfortably close to us. I was the one to see it first. It was a black truck, windows tinted and driver unknown. We drove on for a minute, freaking out and turning completely behind us like creepy Jeep guy, but more normally. Soon, a second truck joined behind it at a fork in the road, and they revved their engines as if in communication. The truck sped up, nearly crashing into us, and we were forced to speed up. This continued through many intense twists and turns where our speed reached up to 70 at the maximum. They flashed their lights, kept speeding up and getting closer. At this point, we were losing our stuff. They were definitely either going to run us off the road or catch us and do who knows what to us. They had these weird red lights on the tops of their trucks, and the light was reflecting off every window in our tiny Honda. Just above a small hill, the main road was visible and relief flooded us. We panicked again, though when we realized we would have to wait for traffic to slow before we could turn, and they would definitely catch us. With nothing else to do, we stopped and glanced behind us. The trucks were gone. We all expected a sudden ambush, but made the turn onto the highway and started home, talking about what the heck just happened. Came to the conclusion that the trucks had probably turned onto a dirt road, only visible to those who know it's there, and that they were chasing us away from their activities. Like the rumors say, what were they doing exactly? We have no idea, and we have no intention of finding out, as we hadn't been back since, and I still can't get the face and presence of the man in the Jeep out my head, and this was over a year ago now. I was a teenager in the 90s, and on this particular night, had found myself stuck downtown. It was around midnight when I finally found a semi-well-lit bus stop. I looked at the bus schedule and realized I may have missed the last bus of the night, unless it was late. I decided to wait on the bench. Moments later, a tall man walked up and sat right next to me. There was plenty of space to sit elsewhere for him, but he huddled up nice and close. He was wearing all black, including a black leather jacket. He started making smooth conversation with me, and I finally looked over at him. He was very tan and had shiny wavy black hair and orange eyes, like bright hazel orange, snake-looking eyes, which contrasted with his dark features and clothes. He really looked like the devil in person to me. He took off his leather jacket and laid it across my lap to keep me warm. I took it off and handed it back to him and said no thanks. He kept draping it back on my lap. I looked around for other people and only saw a passed out homeless person sleeping on the bench. He was trying to coerce me into getting a ride with him because it's so late and he was worried about me. And my bus isn't coming, I'm not safe. I said, no thanks, my bus should be here any minute. In my mind, I didn't know if the bus would be here at all. The streets were dead and dark, and I was scared to leave the only spot that was well lit. After what seemed like an eternity, my bus finally came. It was the most beautiful bus I'd ever seen. I quickly got up and said, my bus is here. He sneered at the bus and said under his breath, you got lucky. I got on the bus and saw out the window him walking to his car in a dark parking lot across the street from where the stop was. He stood next to his car waving at me to come to him, as if that would change my mind. It obviously did not. I was a wild teen that partied a lot and would stay downtown all hours of the night and thought I was an invincible. But after that incident, I never stayed out that late again, especially alone. I really did get lucky and had no intention of pushing it again. I went to school in New Orleans from 2010 to 2012, and I encountered the scariest man I've ever known while attending. My friend from high school and I both lived there at the time. We met up to smoke a small joint on the outskirts of a nearby park. She was struggling heavily with money, for both tuition and everything else, and I was smoking her out for a pick-me-up. While smoking, a man emerged from a white house across the street from the park, one of the nice Garden District homes. He carried his bike over his shoulder and was headed straight for us. We quickly put out our joint when we saw his eyes locked on us, and we initiated friendly conversation. He introduced himself as Ty. He was tan with piercing blue eyes, probably in his late 30s, and seemed pretty athletic. We asked if the nice house was his, and he said he was staying with his friends. He ran back and retrieved 2 beers for us, both unopened, so we accepted. This was a poor choice, but he was insistent. We were already pretty high, and we were a little afraid that he would screw us over if we said no. He pulled out a ring of cards while telling us how he was a model, refusing to tell us what exactly he'd done in the past. The cards all seemed pretty worn and old, but he insisted that they were his press passes. He noticed immediately that I was asking some overly specific questions and was pretty uncomfortable, while my friend, much more trusting, was enthralled. He latched onto her, telling her that he was doing a shoot in New Orleans for the Saints, working for ESPN. She would be paid, he said, and saw her light up upon hearing this. Her phone was off, so she told me to give him my number to communicate. I was pretty mad at this point. He kept making backhanded comments intended to make me feel like the outsider for questioning him. It's not for everyone. This is how you make it in this world with a pretty face. And things of that nature. Putting on a show of fawning over my friend. Sociopaths tend to single people out like that, I learned. I soon heard from him on a daily basis. He would ask how his little lady was doing, my friend, ask for her Facebook and ask for her class schedule, and I told him that I doubted she would be okay with that. She would have been, but she was playing a dangerous game, so I tried to intercept his advances. He found me on Facebook soon enough, though my information was not linked to my number, and I was receiving messages constantly asking for my friend. I thought that if I blocked him, he would continue to hunt me down in crazier ways, or tell somebody about the weed. Young and stupid. So I allowed the barrage of messages. I refused to help him and made my friends aware that he was starting to scare me. I was leaving town with my friend a few months later for Christmas, and told him the week before we actually left that we were both gone indefinitely, as his messages got more and more aggressive as time went on. He freaked out, but it seemed like he would leave me alone in the end. However, every time I went to the park, which was daily in my last week because I was smoking a ton of pot after finals, just keeping it real here, I would see him on his bike, circling the track around the park. I didn't think much of it, nor did I think he could see me because I was with a group and away from the track, and he never acknowledged anyone being there. The day before we actually left, I received several blurry images of the original friend and me lying in the grass on the different days we came together, which wasn't every time I was there. It was obvious that we were smoking pot, so again, young and foolish, we didn't go to the cops. When I got back to my dorm on the same day, placed on the sidewalk by the back entrance I always used, which was rarely trafficked, was an ESPN press pass with the name Tyler Durden, piercing blue eyes staring up at me. It was like it had been laid right in the center of the walkway. That was probably the most frightening moment of my life, and I packed up and stayed with a friend until my flight out. I received phone calls from numbers I didn't have throughout Christmas, making my life miserable. Every sound in my house I feared would be him, finding me at the address with my name attached to it. He was livid, texting in all caps from various numbers that I was a little liar, that I was just a stoner and I was never model material and I was jealous of my smoking friends, implying that he knew of more than just one of my friends. That liars get raped and he would destroy my pothead life, and he'd go into really weirdly worded babbling rants that scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I was scared to tell anyone in my life. I was the good kid who had gotten herself into the stupidest situation. I just hoped he would move on. A week before I was supposed to go back to school, he just stopped. From daily rampages and rants to nothing. I was so relieved until in February I checked my email to find a crime alert warning students of a serial rapist going by Tyler Durden, who lured women to his home, gave them alcohol and assaulted them. His real name is Dean Kelly. A has-been model from an Aerosmith video, baiting, stalking, and assaulting underage girls at schools in Chicago, Texas, and New Orleans. He keeps making it out of jail on bail and contacting his victims, pretending to be other victims who want to talk. Thankfully, I'm not one of them. Screw this guy. I still live in fear years later.